Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ті, хто води всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Світ
Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back today at 4:43 of the news, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine today. And not only are the Russians still getting obliterated in Bakhmut, and the Ukrainians are still making ground moving behind the city, we also saw that the Ukrainians, for the first time in this war, right after yesterday we got the official announcement that the British had supplied them Storm Shadow cruise missiles, we saw one of them get used today, and it almost killed a Russian deputy minister. So what do you know? And also, Matthew, before we even get into the news, I have to make that joke. I'm not going to be talked down to by a junior minister. But anyways.
Order.
We'll be getting to what we're talking about a little bit later on. It is in Luhansk. But with that, we got to get y'all into those sweet, sweet appetizers, because there have been a whole bunch, like we've had the craziest week this week. There has been a whole bunch of crazy stuff that happened even before this. And so we have to, of course, go through what we call the appetizers before we get into the great stuff, which is the Battle of Bakhmut and also the missile strike that occurred within Luhansk today. And so with that, we're now going to be moving up to Moscow, because Moscow is always a place filled with fun people and imaginative ideas. Alcohol does wonders for that kind of stuff. And we can see that some folks up there mean to down on this booze-ridden parade, and some people actually use their brains, and some of them actually attach some flags, well, more so some balloons to a Ukrainian flag, and then let it loose over the Kremlin. Pictures were taken of this little flag today while it was on its jaunt to victory here, and we can see that they put 4 somewhat large balloons onto this flag, and it's like a 3x5 flag, a Ukrainian flag, and it's just flying over the Kremlin. And we can actually see part of the dome of St. Basil's Basilica right there, and it's just passing over, going right into the Kremlin. And once again, nobody shot the thing down. From what we've been told, it just flew all the way from one side of the Kremlin to the other, and then on through Moscow. Nobody even knows if it ever was taken down. It just kept on flying. And so you can see it right there, and it's always fun to see this kind of stuff. And it's always good to know that the partisans have a little bit of fun every once in a while. But after they had that little bit of fun, they immediately drove to the outskirts of Moscow and then set a factory on fire. Here's the clip. And when you see the fire right there, dude, whenever I look at these fires now, I just wonder if the Russians ever consider these to be out of the norm anymore, or if this has just become the new norm for them to see a giant pillar of smoke somewhere in the distance and just go, oh yeah, it's just life now. Because it's bizarre to think that we've seen so many fires like this on film, and they never really subside, I guess you could say. They're always around at almost the same intensity and size as the last one.
My guess is they're probably still just as worried because they've been told so much propaganda. At this point, they probably believe it.
Man, at this point, they probably believe that the President of the United States himself has been dropped off at this factory and said, what do you mean, Jack? He caught this thing on fire. That's probably what the Russians are thinking. But moving on from Moscow and on up towards the area of St. Petersburg, we saw that in St. Petersburg, the Russians have been taking some incredibly drastic and most likely effective steps at stopping future drone attacks against the city of St. Petersburg. You see, they went and got your grandparents' boat, and some of y'all, y'all know your grandparents' boat, the one they have on the lake. Well, they went and got it, and they just put a couple of guys on it with AKs, and this is what they're calling drone defense in St. Petersburg. Here is a clip of this brand new drone defense unit on the river. There they are. As you can see, it is just your normal, like, I guess you could say, lake boat that you would have fun with on the lake. And we could just see them aiming Dragunovs into the sky, and that's drone defense to them.
Seems like it'd probably be ineffective.
It seems like it'd probably be ineffective. It's probably going to end up like hitting like an 18-year-old dude in the window of his apartment building because the boat's rocking too much. He's gonna be like, all right, easy. And as soon as he gets ready to fire, the boat tilts down and he just ends up shooting into an apartment building or something. But I feel like this is not going to end up being a great drone defense method. And look at this guy. He's even got out the old binoculars. I mean, like, this guy is not only shooting down drones, this man's going full-on bird watcher mode out here. He's going to be throwing out the bird seeds and everything next.
Нихуя не понял. Ну, очень интересно.
Now, I gotta be honest
Who's
with
this
you.
guy?
I don't even know who this guy is, but he's got one hell of a rug behind him on the wall. But still, I gotta be honest with y'all, I don't think this is going to be effective drone defense. And once again, we can see the Russians are getting so poor, they can't even afford the anti-drone guns, so now they're just whipping out the old SVD Dragunovs and hoping that those will be able to do the job. And I'll be honest with y'all, they're not. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from Russia as a whole, because Russia is always a place that you can only hang out in for so long. And we're going to be moving really quickly into Russian occupied territory, because this is something that happened today a little bit in the background, and the Russian government actually came out and confirmed this one to be true. So before we get into it, I just want to let y'all know that we haven't seen this helicopter much, so I want to give everyone a little bit of a refresher on what this helicopter is. This is the Mi-28 Havoc. That's its NATO call sign. It is a modern, and I always say that like with a little bit of hesitation there. It is a quote-unquote modern Russian attack helicopter, and it is able to carry, honestly, the same kind of armament that a Ka-52 can. It has the exact same gun, but instead of it being mounted into the hull of the helicopter, it's actually mounted onto a turret on the bottom. It's a 30mm autocannon like you would find on a BMP-2. It can also carry unguided rockets, and it can also carry guided missiles as well, which are called Atankas. This is a helicopter we don't really see much in the war, at least in this phase of the war. We used to see them here and there, but these are very expensive. They are one of the, well, I believe they are the most expensive helicopter that the Russian army flies at the moment, and they are also the supposed most advanced. The Ka-52 is just almost right on par, but we believe it's just a little extra step down. On top of that, the Ka-52 also has ejection seats, which is really the only plus that a Ka-52 has that an Mi-28 does not have. Anyways,
This thing, like George Tencher said, looks like an Apache wannabe. It's almost modeled directly after it.
It looks goofy. I mean, especially with how the gunner's cockpit is shaped. He hardly has a field of vision, and that's the gunner's cockpit. He's supposed to have a field of vision like there would be in any other helicopter, so that way he can see his targets. But with a canopy like that, he can't, unless if he starts using the cameras and optics that are mounted onto the front of the helicopter, which is, it's what they do, but usually you want a good field of vision as well. It's not that great of a helicopter, honestly, as well, because we never really saw them perform over the top in Ukraine, and we also saw a couple of these get shot down. But speaking of helicopters that didn't end up having to be shot down, one of these just crashed today, and we saw a picture. Wait, hang on, that's actually the second bit of news. Let me get to the first one, where we saw the picture of the pillar of smoke coming from the field in the distance after this Mi-28 rammed into the ground. And later on in the day, the Russian Ministry of Defense came out and stated, today during a planned training flight in the Dzhankoy region of Crimea, an Mi-28 helicopter crashed. The flight was carried out without ammunition. There is no destruction on the ground. Both pilots were killed. The preliminary cause of the crash is a technical failure. And so they couldn't really hide this one that well, because obviously they crashed in the middle of an occupied Russian area. So they just had to come out and say, the thing crashed, the pilots are dead, and we're going to blame it on a technical failure. And honestly, it probably was a technical failure, because the Russians can't maintain anything. We've seen that throughout the war non-stop. So it's no doubt at all, it probably was poor maintenance that led to this helicopter to crash. And so now the Russians have lost a fairly rare and fairly expensive helicopter. Once again, like almost everything else they have, completely irreplaceable at this point in the war, and we probably won't ever see them have a replacement for this thing ever since, even if the war ends. They probably won't ever find a competent replacement for this helicopter. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that great little side note of news. Once again, not really a lot to show there, but still it is great to know that the Russians are taking indirect losses behind the lines that they once again cannot recover from. And with that, we're now going to be moving into our location unknowns. And we actually have a somewhat smaller amount of location unknowns today. And so starting off with our first clip, we saw some armed forces of Ukraine kamikaze drone strikes. These are in general just compiled from the entirety of the armed forces of Ukraine, so we can't really say exactly where these were or what kind of effect it had on the front lines. All we can note is the destruction of the equipment that we saw on film. And so we can hear them playing the chat music, and we can see the first kamikaze drone coming down right on the roof of the Tiger M. considering that it came down on the roof, we might be able to say that it did blow straight through the armor and right into the crew compartment, because usually these armored cars, much like every armored vehicle, are only armored along the sides, and on armored cars, sometimes the bottom as well, so that way it's mine resistant. The roof is usually not as well protected as the rest of it. So we can see it go right into the roof. In the next clip, we can see another kamikaze drone going in on a group of Russian soldiers, and based off of where it was landing, we can see that it was pretty effective. In the next clip, we can see them going for a grad. And I bet the Ukrainians were very glad to hit that grad. We can now see them doing it again. Very nice. And just in case you want to see it again, here it is on a KAMAZ supply truck. Very nice. And now, some infantry. And that's the end of the clip. Oh, of course, the Ukrainians always make a sick outro as well. But as I guess you could say, the Ukrainians were able to make sure that these Russians were no longer a part of the special military operation in any way, shape, or form. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little bit of location unknown news, and we're now going to be moving into something interesting today, which will play into a good deal of, I guess you could say, the news coming from Luhansk, which we'll be getting to in just a second. But we got to see a map today that someone came up with, and it was actually fairly accurate. It shows the exact range that the Ukrainians have, or the reach of Ukrainian armed forces behind the lines, from the measurement of a TOS thermobaric launcher, and then going all the way to a Tachka cruiser, well, Tachka ballistic missile, while I sit here and stutter my way through it. What happened, Jack?
What happened, man?
But anyways, we can see the Russian-occupied territory highlighted in red, and then we can see the front lines in a bright red line, and then we get a little measurement of how far can each kind of artillery system reach out. And so based off of this, of course, we can see that Ukrainian frontline artillery, of course, can't reach in that far. It is frontline artillery. It's not supposed to be trying to reach all the way to Moscow. So frontline artillery effectiveness largely ends, for most, around the slightly yellow-orange line right here that my mouse cursor is in the center of. Right there is about as far as frontline artillery of the Ukrainian armed forces can shoot. They also included the TOS-1A, and we've never seen the Ukrainians use the TOS, so I guess that's more so to show what the Russians might hypothetically be capable of with the TOS, but we've never seen the Ukrainians use one. So really, the M777 is one of the shorter range artillery pieces they have, but of course, as always, one of the most deadly accurate as well. The farthest out system that they had up until today was the Tachka ballistic missile with a range of around 90 kilometers. This thing could reach pretty far back behind the lines, reaching the outskirts of Mariupol or almost all the way down towards Armyansk. And so you can see that, of course, that's one of the weapons that they rely on the most, and then the HIMARS is the only other weapon system that can reach about that far. It can reach around 80 kilometers from the lines, about 50 miles in imperial measurement, meaning that it is also one of the longest reaching weapons that the Ukrainian army had up till today. The Storm Shadow, as we're about to get into, was introduced into Ukrainian armed service today, and we also got to see it used today as well. And so this next map includes the Storm Shadow into the range. And so the Storm Shadow's range is about 250 kilometers, which means that, in theory, the Ukrainians can strike anywhere into Russian-occupied territory at this moment, except for the farthest southern areas, like the southern end of Crimea, or the Kerch Peninsula, or the Kerch Strait, or the Antonovsky Bridge. I have a feeling that will change, because this is going off of one of these shorter estimated ranges of around 250 kilometers. There is a supposed range on the Storm Shadow of around 300 kilometers, which would get it almost right within hitting distance of the Kerch Bridge itself. So you can see that the Storm Shadow, they're not going to be using these things a load, and there probably isn't a large amount of them that the Ukrainians have received at this moment. But the ones that they do have are going to be greatly increasing the range and distance that Ukrainian armed forces can strike behind Russian lines, making sure to inflict as much damage as possible, most likely onto strategic targets like large supply depots that the Russians thought were out of reach, communications and command hubs, we'll be getting to that in a second, or maybe even strategic resources like some of the few factories that can produce electronic components, which, while the Russians don't have a lot of them, there are still some around, and a decent amount of those are actually within the DPR and LPR. Kind of a little interesting, but of course, we'll be covering that in a second, but we have to get into the casualty report.
Real quick, is the Storm Shadow the only long-range missile that they have? Because I saw a few people say earlier that they actually had a native one to Ukraine that they make in Ukraine that they only have a handful of.
Yes, it is the Grom or the Krim short-range ballistic missile. It also has a similar range to the Storm Shadow, but it's kind of believed that they may have run out of those because we only saw a few of those kinds of missiles get used, or at least a few instances where we thought that missile was used, and then the Ukrainians never really struck that far into occupied territory again. So we think that they may have run out of the Krim or the Grom missiles.
Interesting. Yeah, because, since they just announced they got the Storm Shadow, I'm sure they probably got them earlier than we heard about it. But that seems like a pretty fast, utilization of those missiles that start, firing them off this quick.
Yeah, it is a really quick utilization, but from what we've seen, it may be the case that it was a Storm Shadow, but we're going to be getting to that in just a second. And so with that, we're going to be moving on from this little location unknown news map, which gives us a little bit of insight and foreshadowing, and now we're moving into the Russian casualty report for the day, and it has been climbing. We're starting to get into those previous few months' numbers. And watch out, they've been doing something in Dubai.
What's going on here?
What happened? And we can see someone saying, line them up. And I think, hey! And then 2 more from Sean White. I had to make sure it was Sean White, not Sean Whittle, because for some reason I was like, what if I get that wrong? And they're like, it's Sean Whittle! But anyways, it is nice to see that everyone is excited for the, pink bobcat. We've never seen the pink bobcat before.
Oh.
And also, look at this. Not sure if this is real, but might help.
It's not real. Just so you know, Twitter put a content, context verification thing on our post. I figured folks could tell it was fake because Putin had 6 fingers and not 5, but apparently it was getting folks mixed up. So Twitter clarified that for us.
And I was actually getting kind of a laugh out of that. And we made sure to clarify on stream last night. It is a meme. It's not being put around as news. Matthew put that thing up there and then it started blowing up. Now people are out there trying to go, oh my God, Putin's dying, and he's not. So I just want to make that clear. He's not dying. Those aren't real pictures. Those are AI generated. Anyways, moving on into the casualty report. 750 Russian soldiers ended up eating lead yesterday over the past 24 hours. Quite a decent amount. That's getting almost all the way back up again to an entire battalion tactical group's worth of the Russian army wiped out in a single day. We also saw that 8 armored personnel carriers joined them, once again just a little bit below average, but still not that bad. We also saw that 12 supply trucks went and joined those soldiers the other day as well, and that is right within the war's average. A very nice number. A whole round number. Divisible by 6 or even 2. I like it. It's great. Even 3 and 4 you can divide 12 by. It's a wonderful number. Anyways, moving on from that, we can also see that 5 main battle tanks were also destroyed over the past 24 hours. That is right within the war's average and a fairly good number. 15 artillery pieces were destroyed again, and it appears that the Russians are not able to shake the Ukrainian counter-battery fire any longer, and they will continue to sustain incredibly high losses in the artillery, either until they run out or until the war ends, whichever comes first. And so we can see that once again, an entire... Let me think here. Almost an entire 4 artillery batteries were wiped out today. We also saw that 9 drones were also destroyed, along with an additional 2 MLRSs and another 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, a total of $30 million in anti-aircraft losses alone, and also the 2 special equipment vehicles. We always call them, and I want to clarify this, we always call them Bobcat skid steers, but they could be anything. They could be recovery vehicles, they could be excavators, they could be anything like that that's being used by the Russian army, and 2 of them were wiped out. And the numbers are getting higher consistently, and it may be showing that the Ukrainians are obliterating Russian forces near Bakhmut, and it also may be accounting that Russian forces are abandoning their vehicles, and the Ukrainians are destroying them as they continue to advance. Regardless, these numbers are great, and they are showing that the Ukrainians are being met with incredible successes right now on the battlefield. With that, we're now going to be moving on from the casualty report. And now we're moving on into not the northeastern front. We're actually going to be passing over because there's only one bit of news there. And we're going to be moving into Luhansk and then going back to the front lines here in a second. But before we do that, before we get into that, we've got to address the polls. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And wow, we were getting into our polls super early. The third one just went up, but we have 2 others to address in the meantime while that one gets some votes on it. And the very first one says, Ukraine confirms advances in Bakhmut and acknowledges that Russian troops are running away And what are your thoughts? 57% said excellent. It's easy work for Ukraine. 2% said unsure. 20% said don't get excited too early. And 21% said proceed cautiously and be wary. And personally for me, I think since the Russians are pretty much running off, the Wagner are somewhat stable, but that's kind of up in the air at this point. I would say this is going to be pretty much easy work for Ukraine. They're obviously not going to suddenly just like wipe them out and push them completely out of Bakhmut, but they will make some pretty decent moderate gains and probably push them back at least halfway in my opinion. But that's just speculation. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that as far as the Battle of Bakhmut is going, to get into the breakdown of the front early, here's what I think. The flanks are what counts. It doesn't matter if Bakhmut is able to hold as a city or if the Wagner is able to hold it. If their flanks are compromised and the Ukrainians are encircling them, they will have to withdraw. And that's why the flanks are far more important in this battle, or any battle for that matter, than the center. Because without the flanks, the center cannot survive. And so if the Ukrainians continue on with their progress, and I'm going to have to be honest with y'all, I have seen some pro-Russian blogger maps today that show where they think the Ukrainian army is. We aren't using them, just in case if they are like pinpoint exact as to where the Ukrainians are, we don't want to use them. But they are showing far more optimistic results for the Ukrainians than the deep state map is. It's showing that they've made it really far behind the lines, miles behind the lines, and they may even be getting towards the rearward area, the eastern side of Bakhmut city, at least within the next day or two. Going off of that, if the Wagner can hold, whatever they want to do, they can try and hold the center as much as they want, and it's not going to really work for them, because if they hold the center, then they just allow the Ukrainians to sweep outside of them, around them, and then encircle them. Then they're cut off from supplies, they're cut off from reinforcements, and they sit there until they die or surrender, one or the other. So if the forces around Bakhmut lose the flanks, the Wagner, regardless whether they were able to hold the city or not, will have to withdraw to try and survive, or they will get encircled and surrender, and then the town will become Ukrainian again, regardless of what happens. So with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well and gives a little bit of a breakdown as to how the battle will be unfolding from this point forward. Of course, usually we would be getting into a little bit more depth about where the forces are going, but considering that these are not Russian forces that are advancing, these are Ukrainian forces that are advancing, and there has been a pretty decent amount of detail that's been coming about how they're advancing. We don't want to get into it too much because some of the things I've seen have been obscure, the ones that get into precise detail about where the Ukrainians are, and I would like to keep them obscure. And so with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next poll says, U.S. officials say that Abrams tanks should arrive in Ukraine by late autumn, and will this be too late? 42% said yes, it's too late by then. 28% said no, it will still be on time and useful. 21% said it depends on the details, and 9% said unsure. And I will say that they said by late autumn. They said they hope to have them there by early autumn. But then again, we know how these deadlines work. Sometimes they push them back. Sometimes they don't happen at all. Really, we can't count on anything at this point because it's all kind of up in the air. But I will say it's probably going to be too late by then, because hopefully by mid to late autumn, Ukraine should have wrapped up this counteroffensive or starting to get near the ending stages of it, and hopefully they will have seen some major progress by then. Abrams would still be helpful at that point, but not nearly as much as they would be right now. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say I don't like the idea of American tanks making it to Ukraine by autumn. That seems honestly a little ridiculous, because we have seen that Leopard tanks and Challenger 2s have been able to make it to Ukraine already, and there's nothing about the Abrams in terms of training time that would make it to where they arrive in the autumn, in my opinion. I think they could arrive much sooner. They could probably arrive right now, really, if we wanted to actually get into helping Ukraine out, instead of just giving them the idea that they'll get tanks, and by the time they get the tanks, the Ukrainians will be fighting at the Kerch Bridge itself with the land army down there. It would be pretty much pointless at that point. And I don't think it's a matter now, especially seeing how well the Ukrainians are able to conduct themselves in Bakhmut, of the tanks getting there before the Ukrainians lose It's more so of getting the tanks there before the Ukrainians end the war. And at this point, I think it's more so of a race to get stuff to them before the war ends than it is to get the stuff to them before they start losing the war. But still, I think that timetable is incredibly long and drawn out for no reason. It could be sped up. And so with that, I hope that does address that poll fairly well, in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next poll says Russia's Kinzhal tried to destroy the Patriot system in Ukraine, but instead the missile was shot down by the same Patriot. And what are your thoughts? 73% said, damn, that's ironic, lol. 5% said unsure, 4% said I still have my doubts, and 18% said great, it is what it is. And I will say that is definitely ironic. And of course, I said yesterday, I do have my doubts. However, this starts to give more pieces of the puzzle. Apparently, the Kinzhal was heading straight for the Patriot. So hypothetically, or at least my speculation is, it would probably make it a lot easier to target the missile as it's coming in by the Patriot. And that could explain why they got that lucky shot. But yeah, it's definitely ironic. And also, as Ash Van E said, it's also iconic because that was quite an embarrassment for Russia. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it is ironic. And that would be something that I think they would use a Kinzhal force to try and destroy a Patriot missile defense system. And they probably said, "Oh, блядь, it'll do fine." And then as soon as the Kinzhal went flying in, the Patriot missile just launched right out of the silo, right into the face of the Kinzhal, blowing the thing up. And then you heard that Pingu meme. And then it just got blown up and it went, oh, whatever it is, because my voice cracks when I try and do it. But yeah, I think that's hilarious and really ironic in a way that their hypersonic missile ended up being destroyed by a Patriot. Now, with that in mind, I would actually have to say that the Patriot being able to shoot down the Kinzhal was probably a fluke in that instant, because considering it was the target and the Kinzhal was being aimed at it, that means that the missile did not have to fly well out of its way 60 miles in one direction or another to most likely hit this missile. It most likely had to just fly right in front of the silo by several miles and then hit its target. So it most likely is a fluke that the Patriot was able to shoot down this Kinzhal, but it does prove the fact that this hypersonic missile is not completely impervious to ground fire or air defenses. It can be shot down. The Patriot is the first missile in the world to prove that it is not infallible. And so with that, I hope that does address that poll fairly well. Of course, in my opinion, and I always want to make sure it's in my opinion because, I'm not the final word on everything. I do have a bachelor's in history now, but that doesn't mean I'm the final word and everything. So with that, Lamau. And how much did that cost me? Too much. But with that, we are on to the question segment. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and moving right into our Super Chat questions. Up first, we have a very generous $115 Super Chat from none other than Mark, Colonel of the LSA. And thank you, Mark, very much for the support once again. And he says, I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. For sinners have all the fun, and only the good die young. So we should all live forever. That sounds almost like a lyrics from a song.
It kind of does, doesn't it? But I thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Mark, and helping this channel to keep on running. I would say if that is supposed to mean that you would rather stay on this channel and have jokes and laugh with us than be somewhere where everyone's trying to act like they're LARPing a Pentagon briefing room, then I'm all for it. Then I'm completely for it. Because I honestly cannot stand the feeling of watching a YouTube stream where someone takes theirself a little too seriously. There are a few out there, and I would have to say it is very rough to watch that stuff because the honest truth is that regardless whoever you watch out there on YouTube right now, we all have about the same information. We present it in different ways, and that's really the only difference. And so when I see people trying to act like they really have the scoop, it's like, well, we have the same scoop. You're trying to act like you're in the Pentagon or something. It's kind of silly, but still. Thank you so much once again for the mass amount of support, Mark. So that way we can keep on throwing down those funny little jokes. And also everyone's saying it's Billy Joel.
Billy Joel. I knew I heard it somewhere.
I'm not singing piano, man. I was about to. But anyways, with that, thank you so much once again for the mass amount of support, Mark, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because without folks like you, this channel would not be possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our second Super Chat is also from Mark, Colonel of the LSA, and he puts in a $40 donation the second time. And thank you, Mark, once again for the support. And he says, you've heard that Ukraine has MALDs, question mark.
I don't think I have. Let me pull that up real quick and see what an MALD weapon.
Or a mauled.
A mauled weapon. So it's an
Ooh, a
AGM,
decoy.
an AGM-160 mauled is a decoy missile developed by the United States. We actually will be covering this one later on tonight. And I was saving the whole dive in for this thing. You actually sent us into this early. So it is a decoy missile that the United States has developed so that way it's intercepted instead of the real missile. So that is really interesting to see. It was developed in the program was begun in 1995, and it appears the first test flight took place in 1999. Let's see, this was reduced to 150. In 2002, the USA have canceled the program because the drone didn't have enough range and endurance to meet the service's requirements or to perform other missions. So, let's see. In May 2023. Like, dang, man. Dude, Wikipedia is on top of things because we will be showing a picture of the remnants of one of these AGM-160s tonight in Luhansk, which is right after this question segment. And they've already updated Wikipedia to where it says in May 2023, remains of an AGM-160 were found in Luhansk following a Ukrainian strike against a target in the city.
Man, there's some very dedicated people that like edit these pages on Wikipedia.
Dude, there are people on Wikipedia who literally just wait for someone to die so that way they can update their like life section. I mean, it's
They
crazy.
probably have like a pre-written like section like to copy and paste it right into the article.
Probably. I mean, like, dude, they literally get up each and every day and they have like the edit function on for Wikipedia, and they just sit there under someone like King Charles, and they just change the number of the day and the month whenever they need to, and they're just waiting for that 1 minute where it comes out, King Charles has died, and then they click submit, and then it just goes up. They're like, yeah. But I gotta tell you, that's also another thing that I kind of respect about the folks, all of the people who work on their little Wikipedia pages. It's really difficult to get things published on here. Usually the information is mostly accurate. Of course, mostly accurate. Sometimes it is wrong. But stuff like this, I gotta say, they've really done their research and they're doing their part of the work as well. But anyways, it is interesting to see that they do have AGM-160s in Ukraine, and it is fairly interesting to see they got those because no one ever mentioned anything about sending those to them, kind of like how the AGM-88 harm went completely unmentioned before, and now it's there, and we can see that it was actually used. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from this mauled, and I guess you could say that the Russians are mauling and seething that they shot one of these things down instead of the Storm Shadow. But anyways, it is now time for us to move on to the next one. But thank you so much once again for the support, Mark, and helping this channel to keep on running once again, because you help out this channel a great deal. And of course, y'all support is the only thing that helps us to keep on running. And so I thank you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the final question of this segment.
All right, and this one goes to Hal Rose, who puts in a very generous $33 super chat. And thank you, Hal, for the support. He says, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, May 9th will forever be personal history for the LSA, Slava LSA, and pick a chat question, please.
And thank you so much for the support. And I would have to say May 9th is going to certainly be one hell of a day to remember in this channel's history. There were, actually, funnily enough, I believe that we had Operator Starsky on last year for May 9th. So May 9th has always been a big deal for us. It's always been a really cool day because, one, we get to laugh at the Russians, and two, usually the Ukrainians give us an extra thing to laugh about. And May 9th will certainly be a day I never forget. It was a night I was hyped to hell and back. And some people in the comment section after the stream went live sat there at like one or two people and said, dude, can you stop with the fake laughs? I don't think people realize that or not, but that's my real laugh. So if it comes off as fake, I don't know why, because it's a legit laugh. But I was having a blast that night. That is one of the funnest and most exciting nights I'd had running this news in a super long time. And I was so happy that so many of y'all were here with me and with both of us, Matthew and me, while we went through that hyped up news where the Ukrainians were just obliterating the lines and showing us that no matter how hard the Russians work to try and achieve something, the Ukrainians can undo it in a single day if they put their effort towards it. And so, with that, thank you so much once again for the support. Thank you also for being here with us on May 9th and enjoying that day, because it was a crazy day. It was a fun day, too, for me. I loved every second of it. And I'm sure it was a fun day for the Ukrainians on the field that were obliterating the Russians. But with that, we are now going to be moving on into that live chat. And what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and the live chat question goes to Eric Kress, who says, Matt, Why is it taking so long to send the M1s?
Why is it taking so long? Well, from what we understand, and that's a really good question. From what we understand, the reason why they're taking so long is because the U.S. is supposedly trying to work out the logistics of sending them. But the thing I don't believe about that statement is that we already have Abrams in Europe, so it's not really like the logistic facilities don't exist. They do exist, otherwise we wouldn't have Abrams deployed in Europe. So it's really more so of a matter of, I guess, we're trying to drag our feet and figure out a way to send them a little bit later than normal, because I really can't come up with a logical explanation as to why it's taking that long. And people love to take statements like that at face value, but I honestly feel like that's a bit of a political move, and I don't mean a political move by a political party in the United States, but a political move by the government in general, try and make it look like they're sending tanks over like everyone else is, but we're really trying to waffle around and see if we don't really have to send the tanks. Because, hell, look at the Challenger 2. The Challenger 2 has much more OPSEC around it than the Abrams. We don't even have pictures of the interior of a Challenger 2 anywhere in the world that we can look at and reference. It has hell, some of the systems inside the Challenger for that reason may even be more fragile, more complicated than an Abrams, and require more logistical features or functions of the armed forces running them to be able to keep those things rolling. And yet those have already made it into Ukraine. They're already on training fields somewhere in western Ukraine, along with Leopard 2A4s, Leopard 2A5s, and Leopard 2A6s. We're seeing everyone's tanks over there except for ours. I honestly don't believe. And also, Activista said that is incorrect. Not logistics of sending, logistics of maintaining. And that's what I'm saying. We already have the maintenance facilities present. And when we wanted to move, for example, there aren't really any U.S. forces that were in Poland en masse in 2022. But when the war began, we immediately moved an entire several armored units into Poland, and they were able to function there just fine, showing that we were able to move their logistical facilities into Poland within a matter of days. And so it doesn't make any sense that we can't move logistical facilities to Ukraine in a matter of a month, because it's giving them far longer time than it took to move the logistical facilities from Germany to Poland. It is just a matter of transporting them. There's not really anything extra difficult involved in it, but we're acting like it's going to take an entire half year to do it. And I've just got to be honest with you. In my personal opinion, I don't see a lot of sense in it. And I see some people buffing that in the live chat and go, oh, you don't know. But I also know this. Back in the day, I said that we were probably going to send Abrams to Ukraine, and everyone buffed that as well. And then when they said we were sending them, people went, oh, I knew that all along. It's like, it's some things just don't make sense. Logistically, the Ukrainians can handle an Abrams. They can be trained to operate them. It's not that different than the gas turbine engine of a T-80. It's just a separate operation system, and therefore it needs, I guess you could say, separate facilities. It's not that difficult to set up the facilities. These things were operated in the middle of a desert with hardly any facilities at all in the Gulf War and in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and they worked perfectly fine. It doesn't take a massive amount of effort to run these things or to train soldiers on them, because it's just not that difficult. I feel like the U.S. government is making this seem to be extremely difficult for really no other reason than to make it look like it's difficult. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. That's my honest opinion on why it's taking that long. Because when we wanted to send the HIMARS, which I would honestly believe to be a far more complicated operating system for the artillerists operating those missiles, we sent those in with no problem. And the training also took no time at all. It took maybe like a month and a half, and then they were there. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Someone said, sounds like conspiracy thinking. Nah, it's not conspiracy thinking, because the U.S. government also said that the Ukrainians could never handle operating in Abrams, and then one day they just magically decided they could. Sometimes we just try and hold back on things, honestly, in my opinion, for no other reason than to try and hold back on it. But with that...
And also, the U.S. has gotten a lot of things wrong. Like, we can't discount the fact that we provided a ton of support to Ukraine, but at the same time, Ukraine knows what they need, and sometimes we aren't delivering what we should be delivering.
And I would agree with that, because at the beginning of the war, we said we would never send artillery systems, because that might get us in the war. And then we sent in M777s, and then we sent HIMARS, and then everyone sent everything else behind us. All the European countries did. We sat there and said the Ukrainians can't... We sat there and said this: we're never going to give the Ukrainians ATACMS, because we're scared of how they're going to use them, or they may not know how to use them because it's just so complicated and advanced. And then the British give them a Storm Shadow and they use it immediately and to great effect, showing that they can operate advanced missile systems like that without any problem. And I've got to be honest with you, I don't really see why it's taking this long. You know, if people can disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. In my opinion, it should be able to be done within a month or two. It should have already been done by now.
I'm still kind of along the lines of thinking like Hoodoo Texas is. He said Ukraine's winning at the speed that the West wants them to win, but just giving them enough to get by. And I've wondered that since the beginning of the war. It seems like we hold back just enough to prevent Ukraine from decisively winning, because we're trying to wear down Russia. That's our objective. We're also trying to help out Ukraine because we don't want them to be taken over by Russia. But, you know, there's some questionable things that we're doing here on the U.S.'s side.
And some people are saying that the reason why we're not sending Abrams is because they have depleted uranium armor. But to argue that, we have thousands of export variant Abrams around the world, in Australia, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq. We have plenty here. There's a decent amount of U.S. armor units that use Abrams that have never had depleted uranium armor installed in them. I heard that from a tanker who operated one of those Abrams and said that they had a different kind of composite armor in the tank instead of depleted uranium. So there are tanks in service in the U.S. military that could easily just be packed up and shipped over there or sent over there that don't have to worry about all of these advanced requirements like we've got to get the depleted uranium out of them. There are tanks that have no depleted uranium in them. We could send those over easily. That honestly is my opinion. I'm going to stick with my guns on that one because I'm pretty vehement. We could send those over as easily as a Challenger 2 or as a Leopard 2. And on top of that, why in the world are we trying to keep depleted uranium armor secret? The British sent over their Challengers that have Chobham armor in them. And Chobham, from what we understand, is even stronger, at least from the public information, than depleted uranium is. And they sent those over. They never removed the Chobham from the Challenger 2s. Why in the world are we going to act like the depleted uranium is something special now? You know, I've got to be honest with you, it should be done quicker. But with that, I hope that does address that question fairly well. And was that our last question of the segment?
Yes, and also there's a poll coming on that topic, by the way. So if y'all want to weigh in, you're about to have your chance.
All right, and so with that, we're now going to be moving out of this question segment, but I hope I answered that fairly well. It was an interesting discussion as well in the chat, and I got to be honest, while I get pretty adamant on what I say, some people are bringing up good points that may be the case. You know, because I'm never going to say that I'm completely right on that kind of stuff. It may be the case that for some reason we don't no longer have non-depleted uranium armor versions of the Abrams in service. But who really knows? Still an interesting argument, though. But with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope we answered that live chat fairly well. And thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on rolling and once again being with us on May 9th, which was one hell of a day. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from the location unknowns and this question segment and right into Luhansk City. We haven't really looked at Luhansk and Donetsk a lot on this channel, and especially not Luhansk. We usually just, you know, say Luhansk is a city and show where it is and we move on. But Luhansk was a fairly large city. It still is a fairly large city, even in the present day. Back in the day, the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts made up 15% of the Ukrainian country, the nation of Ukraine's GDP before 2014. They were a massive part of Ukraine's, I guess you could say, technological industry, amongst a bunch of whole other things. And in all honesty, Luhansk, out of the two cities, Donetsk and Luhansk was about as much of a political or economic motivator as Donetsk was. It's a very important city, and it has a decent amount of, I guess you could say, larger industries in it. One of those industries is an electronics factory. I believe it's like Factory 100 or something similar, kind of carrying over its Soviet legacy name. Soviet legacy names aren't really that creative. Nonetheless, Luhansk has proven throughout the war to be the safest place that the Russian army can coordinate their efforts from and use as a headquarters, and that the DPR and LPR could use as well. So if you look at the war, Rostov-on-Don is where Russian efforts kind of coalesce, but Luhansk is where Russian efforts actually come into being and get their rigid shape and form. And that's also where the LPR and DPR's offensive objectives and also their actions get a rigid shape and form is from Luhansk, because this is where most of the Russian army's brain power, their command power, comes from, is from this city. over the early hours of this morning, a missile was heard and seen to be streaking over the city, and we could see a smoke trail coming from it. And so here is this trail coming off of something from Luhansk. We can also see this. It already says that the attack was from a storm shadow, but here's the streak of some missile that was flying over Luhansk. And we can actually see that it split into two pieces right there. Now that's interesting because I don't think anyone made a specific note about a storm shadow separating into two pieces. It does have two explosive charges, one to get it through its target, the second one to explode inside of it, but nothing ever said that they were supposed to split off into two separate pieces. So we don't really know what's up with that part right there. But we did see, later on, a nice roaring fire coming from Factory 100, and also another roaring fire coming from what was assumed to be the military headquarters of the Russian army. And so let me see if I can find the right one, which is this one right here. Wait, hang on. Dang it, there's so many videos, I gotta go find the right one now. Let's see, it's not that one, is it? I think it's this one. Wait a minute, hang on. Where in the world's the fire one? I gotta go try and find the fire one now. Here we go. I think this is it. Here we go. And so we can see the massive fire raging from the factory. Factory 100 right out there in the distance. And we can see it's pretty rough.
This guy is breathing the oxygen.
Dude, this guy's going, quick, I can only get so much of this. But anyway, so you see the massive fire there, and then afterwards, after the fire subsided a few hours later, we got to see the damage that was caused, and it was a substantial amount. We can see some kind of a Russian reporter guy who's like taking selfies in front of the damaged parts of the building, but we can see that the entire factory, for the large part, was destroyed. We also were told, and it's kind of a little weird because I'm still trying to piece it together. We were told the two targets were hit, but at the same time, we don't really see the two targets clearly being defined. We only really see a singular target. So I don't know if the Russian headquarters was also in this factory or if the factory turned into a headquarters and it was no longer operating. No one's being really clear about that. But we can see the damage was substantive. In fact, it was massive. And we also see what is maybe fragments of the missile that hit, but they're incredibly small, and we can't really tell what kind of missile it is from these fragments alone. Moving on into the next bit, we also saw the deputy of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, Viktor Vodolatsky, being pulled from the rubble, and it appears that he got dinged up a little bit, as you can see right there.
Oh,
and
that's a shame.
So real quick, let's pull up Viktor Vodolatsky. Viktor Vodolatsky. Here we go. So he is a, let's see, is a Russian politician who is a member of the Federal Assembly, a deputy of the State Duma of the 5th, 6th, and 7th convocations. He is a member of the United Russia faction, which is Russia's, Putin's political faction. A first deputy chairman of the State Duma Committee on CIS Affairs, which is the Commonwealth of Independent States, which is it's really hard to explain. It's kind of like the Commonwealth of Nations for the British, but this is for the former Soviet Union. Eurasian integration and relations with compatriots, and a chairman of the Supreme Council of the Skries. Volodatsky is a member of the Presidential Council for Inter-Ethnic Relations, a member of the Presidential Council for Cossack Affairs. A Cossack general, he was a chieftain of the Veselikov Don Host Cossack Society from 1999 to 2013. It appears that he assumed, let's see, he's incumbent. And so he assumed the office of the State Duma in 2007. He was also the deputy governor of the Rostov Oblast in 2012 at the same time. And he was also the military chieftain of the Great Don Army from 1999 to 2013.
The Great Don Army? What?
We invade the country at dawn. And also,
so he's a real piece of work then. And he also looks really sleepy as well.
Dude.
So he wants to take a nap.
Man, I gotta tell you, man, I don't know if he's looking at me or if he's looking past me. I can't honestly tell. But let's see here. Anyways, this guy's is kind of on up there, the Russian government, as far as it goes. That's really what we're trying to say here. I'm kind of getting distracted by his picture here and trying to figure out his timeline of what offices he held, because it seems as though he was, in the United States comparison, he was a representative in the House of Representatives, but at the same time, the governor of, like, Indiana. You know, it's like, and then also at the same time, while he's doing all this, he is the general of the Alabama National Guard. Like, it's like all over the place. But anyways, he's kind of a higher up person in the government. And we can see that he was in the building and they got him out. And he was dressed up in a little uniform. Probably for that great done army done. But we see him getting dragged out. And then from there, we're going to be moving on into our next bit where we saw continued damage that was caused to this machine plant / headquarters. And I gotta tell you, if a Storm Shadow did that, Storm Shadow is, it has to have a massive explosive yield.
Looks like a real hurricane hit this one.
Man, I gotta tell you, man. But it's not the hurricane you have to worry about. It's always the shadow of the storm that you really have to worry about.
Yes, that was a really nice tweet that Alexei Reznikov sent out, by the way. It was like poetic, talking about the storm shadows.
Yeah, it really was. I think everyone's been quoting that all day, honestly. But that's the end of this clip, and once again showing off the massive damage that was caused to the machinery plant / headquarters. And so we can see that it's caused a pretty decent amount of damage. We don't know who was under that rubble either, because while the one of the Duma members survived right there, who knows who else was under that rubble or who was in that building when it was hit. Could have been anyone. It could have been, hell, Shoigu for all we know. We don't really know for certain. But moving on into our next little clip, we got to see a fragment of a missile. And this is that missile we were talking about a little bit earlier, the AGM-160. And it appears, we can't really read the side of it too well here, but it does appear to be somewhat similar in the shape of a normal, I guess you could say, AGM-160. So let's take a look, a side-by-side comparison of an intact AGM-160 versus what we're seeing right there. Maybe we can get someone standing beside one to give us a little bit of scale. So we can see that it is pretty lengthy. It looks to be about 8 feet long, perhaps. Maybe about 1.5 feet wide. It's actually kind of sizable, really. And so let's see the picture of this thing again. Gotta be honest with you, that thing is tiny. But as you can see by the shadow here, because the guy is standing, some guy is standing over here, and his shadow's being cast over it. And he's not that far away either. This seems to be a smaller missile. And also a different color than the normal AGM-160, because these are all some kind of a light gray. This one is a solid white, or cream white, and it's not gray. So I think
this is supposedly the Storm Shadow that was sent?
No, this is supposedly the decoy missile that may have followed it in so that way air defenses engaged it instead of the Storm Shadow. But even then, it doesn't really seem to make too much sense because the Storm Shadow is stealth, or it has stealth capability, so it's really hard to pick up on radar and therefore be destroyed. So I don't really know why they would have sent in a decoy. And on top of that, from what we can see, it kind of looks considerably small. I mean, hell, even looking at the ground and just looking at some of the pebbles in the asphalt, this thing is quite small. It's maybe about less than 1 foot wide and maybe 3 to 4 feet long. So
but these things aren't really supposed to be visually accurate. They're supposed to show up on radar and, you know, imitate a certain thing, right?
Yes, but the thing I'm saying is that it doesn't even have the same size as an AGM-160. Like, look at this picture of an AGM-160 for scale, and then look at this thing. This thing almost looks like a small RC plane that crashed on the road.
It might put off maybe a similar radar signature, or at least close enough.
Well, no, Matthew, I don't think you're getting it. These are supposed to be the same missile. This isn't supposed to be...
you're saying visually, right?
Well, yeah, visually doesn't look like an AGM-160, and this thing looks small, and it's an odd color. It doesn't look like the normal color that an AGM-160 is. And so, I think this may not be an AGM-160. It may be something else.
Maybe not, maybe not.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know. But anyways, we can see right there what's supposed to be an AGM-160, but I gotta be honest with y'all, it's looking a little odd. I don't really know if that is an AGM-160 or not. Some people are saying it looks to be the same diameter. I don't know.
I see some folks saying that the decoy can be physically smaller, but on radar it can appear larger by design. And that was what I was thinking. I guess it depends on, I don't really know how radar works. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but maybe depending on what materials they use, it shows up differently on the radar, but I don't know.
Well, yeah, but you know, it may appear smaller on well, it may appear larger than it is on radar, but I'm looking at a physical missile here, and this thing looks far larger than the one they're taking a picture of here.
Okay. I don't think I get your point, but we can go with it.
Well, you know, here, okay, here's my point. Okay, so you have a picture of an Airbus A380, and they say, look, here's a picture of a crashed Airbus A380, but it's the size of a Cessna. You know, it's like it's not even the same size, it seems, to be an Airbus A380. It looks more like a Cessna or something else.
Yeah, I think what most folks are trying to say is this is probably a decoy we're looking at right here on this picture.
Well, this is a decoy. Oh, well, anyways, with that, we're going to be moving on. But still, I don't know if this is an AGM-160 or not, but we're going to be moving on out of Luhansk, because regardless whether that's a decoy or not, it did get hit by a storm shadow, and it is the first use of a storm shadow in Ukraine. So pretty interesting to see, pretty neat to know. And with that, we're going to be moving on into the northeastern area. We only got one bit of news in the northeastern area today. It wasn't a very active day up there. And we can see the front line over the past 24 hours, and not really a lot has happened up there. And so moving on into the area of Novomikilsky, we saw a recon group heading out for a reconnaissance mission. And we see them looking out over the distance. And actually, correction here. That is actually the city of BAKHMUT out there in the distance. So we're actually going to move that marker down into the Battle of BAKHMUT, so nothing happened in the northeast today, and now we're entirely in BAKHMUT already. So then we'll, of course, go into the battlefield analysis after this clip. But we see them showing the city of BAKHMUT as they continue on their walk. See them continuing to walk down the road. We can hear some artillery in the distance sporadically, like right there. And so that's the end of the clip, but there was a small recon group from the DRG Kavkaz moving outside of the city, somewhere near a flank, and going on to a reconnaissance mission. We can, of course, hear firefights continuing on in the distance. We can't tell exactly where. We can't tell if that's a firefight on the flank near Chromove or further south towards Klishkivka, but we can hear the counteroffensive, well, the small counteroffensive still ongoing there in the distance. With that, we're going to be moving on into the Battle of BAKHMUT, and over the past 24 hours, we have seen a small amount of movement. Actually, a pretty big amount of movement. We saw that Deep State is showing that there was a large push that was made somewhere in the area around Berkivka and Yehidne, where the Ukrainians have broken through and are moving forward. And we can also see that down here to the south, once again, they are claiming more ground. We don't really know for certain if these are accurate or not, once again, because we did hear pro-Russian bloggers, and this would have been around 36 hours ago at this point, claiming that Ukrainian forces were already fighting in Klishkivka, so we don't know if these are a little bit slow or whether that Russian blogger was completely incorrect on where Ukrainians were. But we can see that in both directions, the Ukrainians are making large amounts of progress. This right here may be a small move forward, but for the Russians, this is panic-inducing. The reason why is that they have made it, if they're, let's say, hypothetically right here, they are so far behind most Russian lines that there are no defenses in between them and moving north or south, and so they could end up cutting off these Russian forces and forcing them to surrender and completely encircling them. This will freak out the Russian commanders enough that these forces in these fields in this area might start to move back towards Yehidne to try and reposition a defensive line, so that way they can make sure not to become encircled and then, of course, destroyed or forced to surrender. And so these kinds of breakthroughs are massive. massive in their implication, and may mean that we'll be watching the front line up here that the Russians hold diminishing at an incredibly fast speed, and most likely moving back towards Krasnohora. But with that, we're going to be moving into our first clip in the direction of Krasnohora, where we saw Ukrainian forces in the field pushing forward. We hear some fire in the distance as the Ukrainian forces move up through this tree line. And we now hear a small firefight in the distance. We now see something explode, and the Ukrainians continuing to advance. We now see one of them hopping down into a trench. And with that, that's the end of that clip. It was a very small one, but once again showing a little snippet of the Ukrainians continuing on the move. We can't tell if it's dusk or dawn either, but it's sometime near the darkness of the night. We don't know whether the sun's rising or setting, though, but still really interesting to see. With that, we're going to be moving on into our next clip, where we saw in the direction of Berkivka, the 3rd Brigade, otherwise formerly known as the Azov. Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Oh my god, did it duplicate? It
Raggy.
It duplicated. We're going to have to get rid of that one, because that one was actually a clip of the 3rd Brigade firing off their mortar, but for some reason the links duplicated in between them, and so that clip disappeared, and now I only have the one from Kromove. But with that, we're going to be moving on to Yahidne, where we saw the Ukrainians storming a trench. And I'm also going to have to mute it because you can already hear the music. You now see
hello, darkness, my old friend.
I don't know. It sounds like Ukrainian hello, darkness, my old friend, kind of. When you see the Ukrainian soldiers in the trench, where you see them hugging the wall here for a second. We now see another soldier coming up. And when you see something burning down there, they may have thrown a grenade down there that set the trench on fire. We now see the Ukrainian soldiers standing by as the fire continues, and we can see a little bit of the fire dripping down from the, I guess you could say, overhang on top of them near the branches. We now see this soldier moving forward and looking through the fire and firing through the fire. A lot of fire going on here. But you now see him moving a little bit further back behind the other Ukrainian. The other Ukrainian now leans onto the right side of the trench, while the one in the front still sits there. And we can now see them, it appears that he's messing with something in his vest. Can't really tell what it is. It appears that he may have been pulling out another magazine. He's still messing with his vest, but he may be putting in the empty magazine into a pouch. You can now see him loading the AK again. And now he's getting up and he's moving further back from the burning pile of ammunition. He's now getting out of the trench, moving up into the tree line, and he's now telling the other soldier about what's happening in the trench.
Вперед, 10 метрів вперед, братан. І всі за тобою. Займаєте лінію прямої оборони.
You hear him yelling out commands as the ammo continues to burn in front of them.
Піл. Що там? Підари?
We now see him tossing him a grenade.
Блядь, метрів.
And you hear sporadic rifle fire far off in the distance.
Піл, заряджайся і погнали.
And with that, that's the end of the clip, but once again showing a small instance of fighting happening on that western ridgeline. With that, we're now going to be moving further behind the lines into an area that I would say probably doesn't even have Russian soldiers present in around it anymore. But we did see policemen from Bakhmut heading into Hromove and evacuating the single child that was left there. Every single child had been evacuated from Bakhmut, well, more so Hromove, up till this point, except for the single child right here. And so the police are coming in, and they're finally evacuating this the last child that was left in Hromove. And so with that, here's the clip.
Ну тут они где-то в квартиру их и посадили. Все, сейчас все в подвал. Все, идем. Первый подъезд.
And I can't tell if that's ambience or music. It's music. We're gonna have to mute that, sadly. But we see the police going into the house, and it seems as though they may be talking to the parents. And we can see a large amount of citizens who are still inside of Hromove, and they're all hanging out within this one building. The police are now helping them get their stuff out. And when you see the kid right there, they're now loading him into the back of the van. Honestly, usually a statement you don't want to hear, but in this instance, it's a good statement. We now see the van making its way out of Bakhmut, with the police car flashing its lights. Now, I don't know if that's a good idea near a war zone, but they're doing it nonetheless. They may already be away from Hromove, that may be why they're doing it. We now see them unloading the family again. We don't know where, but it is off the front lines. We now see them talking to the cameraman. Let's see if there is no music.
Домов нету.
Домов нету.
Да.
Ничего нет.
У соседки стекла вылетели, двери сорвало, вообще вылетело.
Матвей, привет.
And we see the kid right here. Sadly, the music is still playing, though. And we see the policeman talking to the kid. You now see the kid talking to the policeman. Yeah, I gotta be honest with you, man. His gestures are a lot like a full-grown adult. And he was like, oh, hang on, let me go back and show you that, man. That was pretty funny to me. Here we go. To dub over what he's saying. He's sitting there talking to the policeman. And the policeman says, "Hey, kid, what's you doing?" He says, "I don't know, man. Am I being detained?"
Man, these kids have to do a lot of growing up real fast in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, they do. And you can even tell it by their body language. And it's sad to think about. But at the same time, it's good to know they're finally out of there. And all of them made it out safely. Hromove was getting really close to the front lines as well. The front line was just a kilometer away from the town. Man, that kid just whipped out the knife hand. Look at him. Look at him. Wait, where in the world is that? Hold on, we gotta get back to the knife hand. Well, I was like, where in the world is it? There it is. Boom! The knife hand. He flung it out there, man. Dude, he's going to be...
He said, could I have my land back?
Dude, he sat there and said, "Can I have my license back, officer? Is this over with?" Now you see him looking
It's
around.
wild. This kid does seem pretty mature for his age just through his actions.
He really does. And I got, oh, look at the puppy. That's a cute puppy. And so with that, that's the end of the video. But it's great to know that they got the final last kid out of Hromove, and the whole entire family appears to have been safe and alive, which is very lucky for them, because many people in Ukraine have not had such a fortunate fate as to get out alive with their entire family. With that, we're now going to be moving on from Hromove and back into the city of Bakhmut. And I guess into the city itself. I was trying to make sure we didn't have any clips on the perimeter. But moving on into the city, we got to see the battle continuing. Or more so, what it looks like as the battle continues. Of course, the streets are filled with debris. And we hear artillery fire still conducting in the distance.
Снял вот эти. Да снимаю по новой. Получу. Блядь, пизда ебашит.
The barrage coming in still. The soldier giving us a good look around and showing us what Bakhmut looks like.
Пизда полная. А где там что едет что-то?
Here's something moving in the distance. Can't really tell you what it is. It was really hard to see it. But let's go back and try and get a better look at that thing. So it looks like an APC, but I still can't really tell.
Вот так. Что еще раз? Все. Отходим. Опасно.
Well, that's the end of the clip, but once again showing what the city of BAKHMUT looks like as the battle rolls on. With that, we're going to be moving into our next clip in BAKHMUT, where we saw a T-72B3 being used in the city. Oh, whoa, Shad music. And we see this guy here, his face covered in mud, talking to the tank driver. Then trying to wipe some of the mud off of the top of his lip. And now we can see the T-72B3s in action. You see them firing down the street at Russians into buildings.
Is it normal for the hatch to be bouncing around when they fire like that?
You know, I was going to say, it throws me off. It really throws me off whenever I see tank videos and the hatches are opened a little bit. But from what I've seen, it is actually kind of normal for everyone in the war to do that. The Russians sometimes, they actually flip the hatches completely open, where there's just a gaping hole into the sky, and that's why drone bombers are able to get so deadly and precise with their bomblets, is because there isn't a good target to hit them on. But yeah, I think that is normal from what we've seen.
Does that prevent the vacuum effect if the tank gets hit?
Maybe that's the idea behind it. I don't really know why they would be doing that normally, though. But maybe so. Maybe that's the reason. But I don't really know the actual explanation as to why they all do that all the time. But with that, we're going to be moving on from that little clip and on further down and into the area of Opitny, where we saw the Russians getting hit again, but this time by the 93rd Artillery. Well, the fighting 93rd's artillery. Sorry, everyone, I'm having a hard time speaking tonight, but here's the clip. Oh. Oh, it's a classic! It's a classic, man! Man, I remember when that game was new when we were growing up and people would play it on their phone. But
It
anyway,
was a game?
Yeah, remember Dumb Ways to Die was a game.
No, I just remember from the memes. That's
No,
all.
I mean, like, remember you did, like, don't push the red button, and if you push the red button, the world got nukes? It was Putin Simulator before its time, but anyways, we can see the artillery landing right on top of the Russians. 93rd Brigade, always repping the set. A very good job, and as we call it, raw Jews. We now see the smoke billowing out of the building, but we don't see any Russians on the move anymore. But we can see one right there. And we can see a few more right there, too. That's not good. And the 93rd doesn't like that. They're now going to fix that. Right there. Yep. But anyways, that's the end of the clip, and it's great to see that the 93rd Brigade was once again able to land some incredibly accurate hits on the Russian forces down there on the ground, and of course inflict a decent amount of casualties. Moving even further on down and into the southern flank, we saw a Javelin and a Stugna pretty much having a contest as to which could hit the Russian tank first. Both of them would hit the tank, but one of them was the winner, and I believe it was actually the Javelin up here. So we can see the Javelin on its way. We see it disappear. And in a second, we're about to see it come landing right down on top of this tank. Also, real quick, just in case you didn't see it, here's the Stugna right down there going across the field. The Javelin wins and hits the tank first, and then the Stugna hits it. So if the crew got hit and they were alive for the first one, they were not around for when the second one blew up. We now see the tank is a roaring inferno after being hit twice in seconds. We now see the flames just licking out of the side of the tank. I don't know why people say flames are licking, because that always just sounds kind of weird to me that flames are licking something, you know? But anyways, with that, it is great to see that that tank was destroyed, and hey, what's better than hitting it with a Javelin? Hitting it with a Stugna too. Not just one or the other, but both of them at the same time. We're now going to be moving on into our next bit of news, where we saw that 4 more Russian soldiers have been taken prisoner today. And I put this in my short war summary earlier today, and sadly that one got age restricted within like minutes of going up, so I don't think many of y'all have seen that one. But I saw someone in the comments section say, I don't think these are Russian prisoners, dude, and I'm pretty sure they are. I'll show you why.
Число, когда приехал.
So first off, the first thing that gives away that they're a Russian soldier is that this guy is dressed like a homeless man in Los Angeles. So that's the first thing that gives it away that this is a Russian soldier.
С какого года? 92-го. Приехал в какого году? Сюда. Понятно. Вперед. Стой. Я не знаю, все на колени.
Now see him setting him down. You now see the next prisoner right there.
Сигаретку дай. Пожалуйста. Сигаретку. Держи сигаретку. Держи огня.
And you now see him giving him a cigarette. You can see them all getting cigarettes.
Украинский попробуй. Ротман. Все, все курящие.
And you see, the second thing that gives it away to me that these guys are in fact Russian prisoners and not Ukrainian prisoners is that the guys that are processing them right now or taking on the prisoners have green armbands and helmet bands on. So I'm pretty certain that these are Russian soldiers that are prisoners. I, of course, could be wrong. I'm not an expert on anything, in fact, I have been wrong many times. I have looked at the color red and have called it blue many times before, but I think...
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes, bled. But I think that these are, in fact, Russian soldiers that are taking Ukrainians as prisoner, bled, because I'm wrong.
Ты русский? Кто русский? Да, украинские сигареты, украинские. Ребята, ну зачем вы, блядь, вот это вам делать нехуй? Заставили? Кто вас заставлял? Понятно. Воевать пришлось. Ну вот такая хуйня моя. Теперь хоть живые остались, видишь. Ничего с вами не будет.
So we can now see them all chuffing away at their cigarettes.
Понятно.
This guy over here seems to be really mulling it over. I don't know what's up with the lean, but, he's still enjoying it, I suppose.
The lean?
Yeah, look at him. He's leaning.
Oh.
Wacky slash. That thing, please.
I thought you were talking about a different type.
I just realized what you meant by that. I was like, oh.
Да я их пострелял. Возьму. На колени, руки. Довяжите ему руки, блядь.
And so with that's the end of the clip. But it is great to see that they were able to capture 4 more Russian soldiers. Now, I did see that someone just threw in a question, Matthew. I saw that question there for a quick second before it was quickly asked. But to answer that question, the people over there that are in the war treat it like it's a joke because the Russians are a joke. So thank you for the support, but there's your answer. We're moving on into the next one, where we also saw the Ukrainians blowing the Russians away. The song on this one was something else, but let me take you all to Twitter real quick so that way this thing doesn't disappear mid-clip. Ding! I'm going to have to mute that one because that song is pretty wild. But anyways, we can see the Ukrainian tank rolling up onto the Russian position. This is somewhere in Klishkivka. We now see the tank go, oh, look, Russians. And the chaos ensues. The first shot lands, taking out one of them. The second shot lands, taking out another one. But you now see the Russians try and fire an RPG, but the dollar store RPG misses in tremendous fashion, giving away where the RPG operator was exactly. We can see that right here. It explodes out there in the field, and the Ukrainian tank takes care of him as well. We can now see a BMP rolling up to unload some infantry in the tree line.
Hey, they're getting out of the thing just like they did yesterday.
Yeah, they are, and they're tossing the nades. Doesn't seem that there's a lot of Russians left to really deal with this. And we see them getting another one. And we can see another Russian soldier trying to make a run for it. He gets down here. And he's gone. And so with that, that is the end of the clip. But once again, nice to see. And so with that, we're going to be moving on from that clip. It's good to know that the Ukrainians are still wiping out Russian forces in the area. And we're moving on into the next one, where we saw that the Sheikh Mansour Battalion has been supporting frontline forces with their MLRSs. And also other equipment. And so here's the clip. We can see their MLRS right here. There's no audio in this clip either, by the way. We can now see the crew moving off as the artillerists make sure to aim the rockets. We now see them all getting away from the truck, except for the artillerist here. He's telling someone something. And now they're all away from the truck. We can see those pulled directly alongside a trench.
You know, I know a lot of people have technicals, but for some reason when I see it, it makes me just think...
Сегодня 9 мая, 23...
It makes you think, what?
America.
How in the world does it make you think that? But anyway.
Oh, about a pickup truck and a big caliber gun? America.
Well, I guess if you put it that way, but what I always think of, Matthew, is the swing of the sword, the clash of the knife.
Oh, no.
But anyways,
you two gonna come down here and hammer our kneecaps.
Под Бахмутом. Сейчас вот максимально отправим им подарков этим расистам. Так что, иншаллах, толом вега хирбу. Победа за нами. Сегодня 9 мая 23 года.
now see them getting ready to fire the MLRS again.
Отправляем расистам подарки. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar.
Dude, this guy breathes like Putin does whenever he sees another Russian ship leaving Sevastopol port. He's seeing the guy, don't blow up. Yeah, he's like... But we now see them firing the MLRS.
Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar.
We now see them firing off the third rocket. We see this guy, I think he's just playing on his phone while the rockets launch. I can't really tell for sure. Now see them getting the drone. So it appears he was actually using the drone there. And that's the end of the clip. But it is nice to see that the Sheikh Mansour Battalion is out there continuing to use their drones and MLRSs to provide support on the field. Well, now we're moving on into our last clip from Klishkivka, where we saw more Russians on the run. And we all know that song. We can now see a drone watching the Russian forces moving in. Man, a lot of people in this live chat tonight. I don't know what it is, but some folks are feisty tonight. Cringe this.
Man, it's the
cringe
bots.
that.
The bots
Yeah.
are in here strong tonight.
I mean, they are in strong. But so we can see the Russians pulling up to the side of the tree line here.
If only they knew they're being watched from the sky. They want to scurrying behind the trees.
Yeah. And here comes the artillery. The first shot lands way off. The second and third shot are also pretty well off. The fourth shot's also off. The fifth shot landed way off as well. The sixth shot appears to have also landed somewhat off the mark. The seventh shot's also landed off the mark. This may be some of the most inaccurate Ukrainian artillery we've seen so far, but the next shot did land on the mark. We now see the Russians scooting away after coming under artillery fire. It appears that they don't want to be there anymore. And we now see that they left all of those guys behind, and it appears that they're trying to make the best of the situation. They're just walking out. A lot of them dropped, though, and it seems as though a lot of them got up. Some of them towards the rear, however, they're not getting up. Oh, no, they did.
Here we can see the Russians running into the tree line.
Oh, yes, I forgot. Well, actually, I saw someone saying, man, whenever he does a voice, that's cringe. And, I'm always trying to
I
appease
don't
everyone.
care what they have to say.
But honestly, man, I thought that guy was a nice guy, but honestly, he's just a rat piece of shit, man. He's a rat piece of shit.
Hey, Mike!
Listen, man, you don't know the pain I've been going through. I had to get you kids and busting nuts open like a with a hammer. To show you the pain I'm feeling. But anyways, let me do a voice here real quick, so that way this is more entertaining. Here we can see the Russian herd being departed by their mother and father, the father the smaller of the species. The Russian young now run through the fields completely alone. They see the sun and use it as a guidon to decide where to run to. But alas, the Ukrainians are dropping fat turds onto them that explode on impact, causing great damage and harm to the herd of young Russians. We can now see the stragglers of the group, which will most likely become the target for Ukrainian battery fire as they continue to retreat down the tree line. We can now see the savage bastard finally being banned. Very good day for me. Quite happy. And with that, that is the end of the clip. But we can see that Russians are not that happy, and they are running off the
Hey,
field.
backyard racing's back again.
The backyard racer is back again, once again, racing through the backyard, as many of his species are known to do, as is the name, the backyard racer. But with that, we are now going to be moving on from the city of BAKHMUT, as that is all of the footage that we have from the front lines today. But we do have an explanation of the route, or the route as I spelled it, from Yevgeny Prigozhin. And so, here is the video.
Oh. Nutsack looking shinier than ever on the top.
I gotta tell you, man, the Morse code message has a lot to do with this nutsack tonight, I'm telling you. Anyways, here is the video. As for what is happening, Wagner first surrounded BAKHMUT for a long time, then began to enter BAKHMUT. The whole operation to enter BAKHMUT lasted from October 8 to 7 months. During this time, we took, including Berkutskoye and the settlement of Berkovka, and moving along the road to BAKHMUT, Slovyansk, in the direction of Slovyansk. Now there's a reverse process. After we passed the flanks, there was no tactical retreat. Therefore, Comrade Konashenkov, who put it mildly, saddened. There was simply a runaway of the Ministry of Defense from the flanks. And therefore, the exit to Berkhovsky Olredno Liko, I will not show mine because there is a lot of all kinds of unnecessary information. But if you look at what is happening in the settlement of Berkovka, it means that the enemy will approach BAKHMUT and will end up in BAKHMUT at a distance of 500 meters, taking all the tactical heights. With the loss of the Western Ridge, so to speak, with the loss of these territories that were left, and this is 5 square kilometers, only for today, the enemy has completely liberated the road of the Chasiv Yar BAKHMUT, as we call it, the highway perimeter, which we blocked, what was called the surrounding of BAKHMUT. And the enemy will be able to use this road once, and the second he took the tactical heights, from which BAKHMUT is located like on the palm. The next step, when they enter the settlement of Berkovka, it will mean the gradual surrounding of BAKHMUT. Exactly what I said for a long time. Therefore, the Minister of Defense and the head of the General Staff first achieved their actions, reducing the number of Chelikhovagny in order to prevent us from holding the flanks. After that, they decided that their brave military would stand on the flank, but then they ran away. We still do not give ammunition, give 10% of the maximum from the needs. Therefore, we cannot cover the military with fire. We are not given weapons and military equipment, counting on Chelikhovagny to finally blow up. We continue to storm the nest in Bakhmut. Tonight we took another building. In the morning we took several next entrances. There are about 20 buildings left, and Bakhmut will be completely taken. That's not true. There's about 40 or so. About 20 multi-story buildings, not counting the trifles in the private sector. See, he's not trying to count it, but there's about 40 buildings left. But the capture of Bakhmut by the Russian Federation does not give anything. Because the flanks are falling, the front is falling through. Attempts of the Ministry of Defense in the information field to somehow smooth the situation it will lead to a global tragedy for Russia. Therefore, it is necessary to stop lying immediately. If you ran away, you were building new lines of defense. But what you have prepared for this defense is not what can take this defense. This is just destruction. Therefore, what happened recently, and what I warned about for a long time, begins to happen to a great tragedy for our country. And separately, when we received the combat order on May 7th, then I already said that in this combat order, there were the main 4 points. The first is that if the Chevikov Wagner leaves Bakhmut without permission of the head of the general staff, this will be considered a state traitor. The second is that we are given ammunition in the amount that we ask for. The third is that we are given for communication by the General Army Surovikin. And the fourth is that all flanks are taken by the Ministry of Defense. So on the 4 points, Surovikin was given, the flanks were given away, so much that they would not have started better. Ammunition was not given. And the last question remains, which I called the first, about state treason. Is this rule only spread to Chevikov Wagner or to the military leadership? Thanks to which these flanks were abandoned, who will answer for state treason? Question, please. For the court, a copy of the combat order is available. Thanks.
Is he wearing a Beretta jacket?
Yeah, he's wearing a Beretta jacket. Yeah, he's wearing one. Isn't that bizarre?
Oh, jeez. The hypocrisy never ends.
It never ends, man. It really doesn't ever end. But there you have it again. He's having a mental breakdown because the lines are still disintegrating around the outskirts of Bakhmut. Situation's not improving. And like he said, if the flanks collapse, the center will not hold. So then Ukraine just automatically gets Bakhmut for the large part, unless if the Wagner stays there and then they get into a siege and eventually wither up and die. So as you can see, the battle is once again performing poorly, and it's really only a matter of time before the Ukrainians are able to retake the city, at least if this kind of progress continues for maybe a week. With that, we're going to be moving on from the city of Bakhmut and down the line into the Donetsk region, where we saw the United 24 make a little video clip. Let me make sure this is theirs. Yes, about tank hunting. And so here's the clip. Our brigade's task was to defend the sector from Prvomaiske to Krasnoarivka. You now see them showing a Russian tank.
They spot a Russian tank rolling over Ukrainian soil. To be able to hit their targets, the tank hunters have to get within a range of 5 kilometers. They then connect the targeting device to the launcher via cable and wait for the command to engage.
You arrive
watched
at the
this one
position,
yesterday?
set up the system, and turn on the power on the remote
no, I don't
control
think we
and on
did.
the system to get a signal. Then you detect the target, push the button, and launch. That's pretty much it.
The unit keeps a close eye on the tank's movement as it approaches Ukrainian positions. Like with all hunts, it's a waiting game.
No, we didn't watch this one yesterday.
Наші певно. Пане полковнику, зі стугни пряме попадання в танчик, але він далі котиться. Зараз, якщо буде далі їхати, працюємо з Джеверіна. Все, 12 здохших.
If we hadn't hit the tank, they would have probably destroyed the manpower in our trenches. Their reinforcements, which you also saw, the BMPs, would have taken over our positions, and the brigade's security would have been significantly weakened.
This is the footage from the exact Stugna unit that destroyed the T-72 seconds before. Stugna is the Ukrainian anti-tank missile system. It launches a laser-guided missile capable of penetrating up to 800 millimeters of armor.
We saw that.
We saw this
yeah,
one.
we
I
saw
know
that.
for sure.
The danger lies...
Wait, hang on.
It was worth it to see that scream again.
The first part was a little new. I don't remember seeing that part. But I do remember seeing the scream, and now that this guy is saying this line, I remember that line like it was yesterday. So with that, we're going to be moving on from that little clip. Once again, nice to see that they're doing some anti-tank action out there. And down towards Marinka, where once again we had another drone flyover showing the damage to the city.
Could I have my FPS back?
Man, this thing, honestly, man, sometimes the drone footage looks surreal. Like, this honestly looks like a video game or something similar with some very good graphics. It is unbelievable to see the kind of damage that's been caused. But on the bright side, this damage always proves, and I always say this whenever we see this kind of damage, because there is a silver lining to it, that the Ukrainians have held these positions so well that the Russians have practically reduced the city to rubble, and yet they still hold the line.
Jeez, it's just like rubble out in an empty field, basically.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I think, one second, while we watch this video, I would like to show everyone something from the First World War, because it's crazy whenever you look at the destruction that war causes. It's always the same. So let me see if I can get some World War I trench air footage. Here we go, I found it. There we go. I'll show this to everyone after this video ends. We can see still see them flying through Marinka and showing the damaged build, well, the destroyed buildings. I wouldn't even call these damaged. I think they're leveled, really. And we can see them just kind of scanning the floors. That was one of the few buildings in the area that actually had its roof intact for the most part. And no,
this is Bakhmut. This is not Bakhmut.
No, it's Marinka. And that's the end of the clip, but showing what Marinka looks like. And real quick, actually, to show y'all something very interesting. This is aerial footage taken from 1919, showing what the battlefields of World War I looked like after the war had ended. They used a Zeppelin to fly over these areas, and then they just filmed it from there. But kind of the same in aerial footage with how the destruction looks. You know, that almost looks just like Marinka, really. It's kind of wild. People 100 years ago had the exact same idea. Like, let's take something up into the sky and go film the damage of the war. But you really can't tell a difference in between Marinka and this, rather than this was 100 years ago. It's just eerily similar. It's just it's insane to think that 100 years later, the damage and destruction of war is still the same. And people always think that World War I would be a lot different, and not as bad or not really as understandable as a modern war, but this is the exact same kind of stuff you would have seen in France at the end of the war in 1919, like we see here.
It's weird is we have slightly different weapons now, but generally it's almost still the same, minus the fact that nukes are the new backup.
Yeah, it is really crazy. And no matter the advances really just help to keep everyone on the same playing field, maybe give a small advantage to one side or the other. But the destruction is still the same. The wars are still the same for the large part. The way they're fought is very similar. But, just to show y'all a little bit of that footage, that's footage from the First World War. I don't know exactly where they flew over, and what part of the front that was, but still, looks a lot like Marinka. Anyways, with that, we're going to be moving on from Marinka and down towards the area of Volodar, where we saw that a Russian BMP got blown up today. All of our APCs keep blowing up! And so here's the clip. We can see the BMP smoking, and then poof! And a little piece goes flying up. Always good to see. We love it. We love to see it. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little clip and further on down the line to the area of Zavetye-Bznaya, where we saw a Russian tank being destroyed. Again. Oh, copyrighted music. But we can see a Russian tank on the move. We can see the cope cage visibly on top of it, showing us it is a Russian tank. We now see the Stugna fire and traveling on its way right towards the tank and slamming right into its side. And we're waiting, and it fired, the tank fired, and poof, Igor! And now we can see a little bit of fire coming out the side of the tank. Most likely the Stugna did puncture the tank. And now we can see it from a drone. And yeah, it definitely blew up the tank. We couldn't really see it that well on the Stugna's camera, but from a drone camera, we can see that the thing is gone. And with that, that's the end of the clip. But once again, more Russian tanks destroyed. Always good to see. With that, we're going to be moving down to the, I guess you could say, the farthest west that we could go on the southern front, where we found a clip today, where we saw that a warehouse in Zaporizhia was destroyed by none other than the Ukrainian army. So let's watch the clip. Also, Chad music ensues, but we can see the ammo warehouse being hit by artillery. The video loading in as we go.
That looked like just a normal house, basically.
Yeah, it kind of did. And when you see the ammo burning in there. And with that, that's the end of the clip. But it is nice to see the Ukrainian army was able to hit another ammunition warehouse and destroy it. With that, we're now going to be moving on into Kyiv, because we've covered all of the news, north to south, east to west, and of course, it is now time for the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky on the 443rd day of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech. Speech!
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Сьогодні у нас санкційний день. Затверджено 5 санкційних пакетів, які ми дуже ретельно готували цими тижнями в РНБО, Кабінеті міністрів, Офісі, в наших спеціальних службах. Перше – це пакет, що стосується Запоріжсталі. Блокуємо вплив на цю компанію держави-терориста, що існував завдяки різним підставним та офшорним особам. Частка, що контролювалася Росією через один із системних банків, буде конфіскована і працюватиме заради України і українців. Ми не залишимо жодного зв'язку держави-терориста в Україні, який вона може використовувати проти нашої держави, проти нашої економіки чи проти наших людей. Окрім цього, затверджено санкційні пакети, які продовжують наш курс на ізоляцію і блокування російської військової промисловості. Сотні фізичних та юридичних осіб держави-терориста та пов'язаних із Росією стають мішенню для глобальної ізоляції. Дуже активно працюємо із партнерами, щоб всі, хто фактично виробляє цю агресію, хто дає зброю, боєприпаси, техніку і технології в руки терористів, щоб вони всі були роздавлені світом. Дякую всім, хто допомагає Україні тиснути на Росію за цю війну, а також блокувати намагання держави-терориста обходити санкції. Впевнений, це має визначатися як один із найтяжчих злочинів проти міжнародного права та міжнародного миру. Намагання обійти санкції, що введені для обмеження ресурсів агресії або сприяння у цих намаганнях. Провів сьогодні засідання Ставки. Були важливі доповіді командувачів оперативних напрямків. Особливо відзначу доповідь генерала Сирського та генерала Тарнавського, командувачів ОСУ Хортиця і Таврія. Відповідно, була доповідь главкома Залужного, міністра оборони Резнікова, міністра Стратпрому Камишина. Що важливо розуміти зараз? Окупанти вже внутрішньо готові до поразки. Вони вже програли цю війну в своїх думках. Ми повинні щодня тиснути на них так, щоб їхнє ж відчуття поразки перетворювалось на їхню втечу, їхні помилки, їхні втрати. Я дякую кожному і кожній, хто знищує ворога. Дякую всім, хто, попри будь-які складнощі, повертає Україні нашу землю. Готуємось додати вам, воїни, ще більше зброї, ще більше можливостей, щоб подолати агресора та відновити мир. Говорив сьогодні із прем'єр-міністром Британії Сунаком. Дякую тобі, Ріше, за незмінну підтримку і саме ті кроки, які дають усьому світу зрозуміти, що Сполучене Королівство завжди буде лідером. Ми обговорили нашу теперішню взаємодію у зброї, нашу подальшу оборонну взаємодію, а також дипломатичні кроки, які маємо зробити разом, щоб наблизити нашу спільну перемогу. Щоб гарантувати, хто б не був агресором проти вільного світу, він завершить такою ж ганьбою, як Кремль. Слава усім нашим воїнам, які зараз в бою, на бойових постах та у бойових завданнях. Я дякую усім, хто тренує наших бійців. Я дякую усім, хто лікує та відновлює українських воїнів після поранень. Слава Україні!
And with that,
Героям слава!
Slava Ukraini. And that is the end of the speech for President Volodymyr Zelensky. And that wraps out our day 443 War News Summary. I thank every single one of y'all so much once again for watching this War News Summary. If y'all did enjoy, make sure to subscribe because it makes us really happy to know that people do enjoy this channel enough that they would find it worthwhile being notified when we run our streams. And you wouldn't be disappointed either. If you're looking for daily war news, this is the place to be. Not only do we put up daily short war summaries that are around 2 to 3 minute long videos showing some of the highlights of the day's activities, but we also run these live streams 6 days a week, every single night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Monday. We take Mondays off, and always remember that. We always take Mondays off. So if you ever show up on Monday and you ever say, hey, where's the live stream? We've never ran a live stream on Monday, except for during the first month of the war. Since then, we've never run a stream on Monday, except for like once or twice for very special occasions. But with that, I thank you all so much once again for watching our news segment. We're about to be moving into the second segment of the stream, and just in case if any of y'all are new, our second segment is completely separate from the first one. Our second segment is the question segment, and that is where we go through and we answer all of the super chats that have come in tonight, which are the only way we're able to support this channel, and then we also address as many live chats as we can. This channel operates off of an entirely free-to-watch premise. You can support this channel if you want, and you can decide how much you want to support it through a super chat. But if you don't want to, and you don't really, you can't, it is perfectly free to watch. You never have to watch an ad. You never have to listen to a sponsor. You don't have to do any of that. You just hop right into all of the videos and all of the streams without having to wait. And, you know, whether you support us or not, that's up to you. And how much you support us, that is also completely up to you as well. But we always want to make sure to address the super chats because they do help this channel keep on running. And we are very appreciative of the folks who do decide to support us because it's the only way we can keep this thing going. And so with that, we're going to be moving into the question segment, but before we get into those questions, we have to get into the polls. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and this time we have some really juicy polls. Some of them are contentious, and I actually put quite a bit of thought into making some, I guess you could say, philosophical, sort of bigger question pictures here. That didn't make any sense, but let's ignore that and move on to our first poll. And it says, Ukraine attacked Luhansk with long-range missiles, and will these long-range attacks become common? Looks like 58% said yes, this will become very common. 8% said unsure. 15% said it will become sporadic only, and 20% said no, they have only a limited supply. And I think it'll be no, because they don't have very many of them, and even though the UK has given them some, they are very expensive, very rare, and also they need to use them sparingly. And it wouldn't be wise to strike into the Russian mainland with those missiles, because that could cause very unfortunate events to basically be forced upon those Russian, ugly word, insert here. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say they're probably not going to use them much just because they're rare. And also they're incredibly expensive. The Ukrainians didn't really have to worry about the cost of them, but they do have to worry about the number of them that they have. So they're going to most likely use them very sparingly and very little. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
And the next poll says, is the U.S. withholding equipment to prevent Ukraine from decisively winning the war in the short term? 44% said yes, it certainly seems so. 29% said no, it's logistical and political issues only. 17% said it sounds like a conspiracy theory. And 10% said unsure. And I'm going to go with the 44%. I think the U.S. is withholding equipment on purpose. The U.S.'s objective is to wear down Russia. We do care about Ukraine to a minor degree, but I don't think that is the main motivation behind sending all these weapons to Ukraine. The U.S. typically approaches foreign policy from a America-centric perspective, and typically not from a perspective of trying to be altruistic and help out other countries in that kind of sense, if that makes sense. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would agree with that, but I wouldn't say that the United States is special in that regard. Every country always comes to an event with their own interests in mind. They never go out of their way to take care of anyone else. And regardless of what people think, regardless of whether people think, oh, it's a humanitarian thing. Humanitarian things are very rare, and usually whenever we do anything humanitarian, it's incredibly cheap for us to do, and is really done with some other, I guess you could say, implication in mind. We don't give food to Central African countries because it's nice. We give food to Central African countries because it may sway their government into doing what America may want, or making sure that people that America don't like don't end up in Africa. That's why we do it. There's always a reason behind why we do things. It's not like humanitarian reasons only come into play if there's an actual strategic interest or a reason behind it. And that is what we're looking at with Ukraine. If Ukraine was, say, Sudan, we wouldn't care. Like, look at how much we care about Sudan. There's a war going on down there, and people are dying in that war. But did you really hear about America doing anything involved in this civil war? Hell no. What they did is the only thing they did is that they sent in the special forces to get our people out, and then we let them go back at it again. That's all we care about. So with Ukraine, of course, we're concerned about our own strategic interests. That's why we do support them. And the strategic interest we have is to get the Russian forces out of Crimea, specifically out of Sevastopol port. And that's what we're caring about. So I think that we're just trying to help them out enough that they'll slowly be able to win this war. And emphasis on slow, so that way the Russians can mentally cope with it, and it doesn't seem as though they're being steamrolled, which may freak them out. Because if they're slowly being steamrolled, they kind of get used to it instead of just being steamrolled immediately, and then they freak out and go nuclear or who knows what. So we may be trying to make sure that their progress of steamrolling the Russians is a little stymied or a little bit slower than it could be. I would honestly go with that. And so with that, I hope that does address that poll fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
All right. And the next poll says, do you believe that Ukraine will never use long-range missiles to attack the Russian mainland? It looks like 47% said they will never attack the Russian mainland, 8% said unsure, 29% said they might attack it, and 16% said they will attack the Russian mainland. And it looks like the majority of folks think they either might or will, which, like I said before, I don't think that would be wise. They should keep those missiles within their sovereign territory, because Ukraine's goal isn't to simply, start taking parts of Russia. Their goal is to simply defend their land and keep it. I think they've made that abundantly clear. They could send a missile in to cause chaos and disruption, but in reality, that really doesn't help them in any realistic way. The goal is to eliminate the forces inside of Ukraine, but that's just my opinion. So, Enforcer, what say you?
And can you reread that poll prompt again?
Do you believe that Ukraine will never use long-range missiles to attack the Russian mainland?
I don't think they will, because they made a guarantee to Britain, who provided the Storm Shadows to them, that they wouldn't be using their missiles for that. We have seen the Ukrainians use their own. For example, the Tu-141s and also a Grom or a Krim on maybe 1 or 2 occasions. But I don't think they'll be using anyone else's missiles to attack into Russia. And so with that, I hope that does address that poll fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And the next one says, if Russia were to propose the withdrawal of its forces and it keeps Crimea, should Ukraine consider this deal? 67% said no, they should never compromise. 16% said it depends on the condition of Ukraine. 13% said they should probably consider, and 4% said unsure. And on this one, I think it strongly depends on what Ukraine's goals are. If their goal is to take back all of their land and don't compromise whatsoever, they should never entertain that deal. However, if they are trying to basically stop anyone from getting killed from this point forward, they might need to consider maybe compromising. It comes down to basically what Ukraine is after. Right now, they've made it very clear that they're after taking back all of their territory and also Crimea. They've extended it down there to that place now. It basically comes down to personal opinion. On this one, I'm going to remain unsure. But Enforcer, what say you?
And can you reread that prompt again real quick?
If Russia were to propose the withdrawal of its forces and keep Crimea, should Ukraine consider this deal?
I don't think they should. From an American standpoint, that means that we got nothing out of this whole thing, and we have to get something out of it, and so we have to have the Ukrainians get back Crimea. On top of that, the Ukrainians are, it's not like a new thing that's been tacked on. Crimea was the first thing they were wanting to get back since the beginning in 2014, because that is their territory, and the Russians did steal it from them. So I think that they should get it all back, and they shouldn't settle on anything until the Russians agree to give it all back and then leave the country. That would be my opinion on it. And so I hope I addressed that poll fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next poll says, if the world's most skilled negotiator tried to broker peace in Ukraine, would it even be possible? It looks like 56% said no, one side won't be reasonable. 18% said yes, peace is still possible. 9% said unsure, and 17% said no, both sides won't be reasonable. And the part about the world's most skilled negotiator, that comes down to your personal beliefs. So everyone's probably going to have varying opinions on who that would be. I don't have anybody in particular right off the top of my head, but I would say that probably Russia is not going to be reasonable. But at the same time, Ukraine wanting every single piece back, including Crimea, that's also a little bit extreme to go down to Crimea, because they already held that prior to this thing breaking out a year ago. Not saying that they shouldn't go and retake Crimea, but I don't think Russia would ever consider that. But that's just talk and negotiation, which seems very unlikely at this point. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, could you reread that poll prompt again? Because usually your answer is long enough, and I'm trying to listen to it, that I don't really remember the poll prompt. So could you reread that one more time?
If the world's most skilled negotiator tried to broker peace in Ukraine, would it be possible?
Henry Kissinger, send him out there. We need our worst negotiator to be our best negotiator at this point. He's going to show up and go, just give him everything. But to answer that question, I don't really think they could right now, because both sides are pretty hardline on what they want. Ukraine wants to reclaim all of their territory. Russia wants to keep all the territory they hold right now, and they still want the rest of Ukraine. So I don't really think anyone would be able to negotiate a peace at this point, because neither side is really budging right now, and so it's got to keep on going for a little while longer. So with that, I hope that does address.
And also, I want to clarify one thing real quick. I saw Chip Kerwan say extreme, Matt, Crimea. And when I say extreme, I mean in a negotiation sense. To say they want Crimea back in a negotiation would basically be a non-starter. That's if they were willing to entertain a negotiation in the first place, which it appears neither side is willing to do that. So it looks like they're going to fight this one out.
I would say probably the best thing I could do, if the Ukrainians wanted to compromise, I think the Ukrainians could probably give a lease to the port of Sevastopol, not an unlimited lease, but maybe a 25-year lease of port access rights to Sevastopol, and they get everything back, including all of Crimea, including Sevastopol City, and the rest of the occupied territories. And I think maybe the Russians would agree to that. The United States probably wouldn't be too happy with that. I got to be honest with you. I wouldn't be too happy with that result either. But then again, no one's really happy with the compromise. The Russians wouldn't be happy with only having a 25-year lease. But at least it would kind of get things taken care of and done with. But I don't think the Russians would agree to that because the Russians know that once that 25-year lease ends, they don't have a warm water port anymore. And so then they're back at square one again just 25 years later. The United States probably wouldn't be happy with that either because the Russians would still have port access rights and the Black Sea Fleet would still be operational year-round during the time that we don't need them to be operational, which would be over the next 25 years. So I still wouldn't go with that idea. I still think that the Ukrainians need to get back everything. But I wouldn't really consider letting them keep Crimea. That is the whole point. The war is really being fought for, so they need Crimea back, if anything. Honestly, they could give away the Donbass. Like, if we're saying they have to give away something, the Donbass could be given away, but for strategic and economic reasons, the Crimean Peninsula cannot stay with the Russians. It has to go back to Ukraine. Really, all of it has to go back to Ukraine. But with that, I
think the reason why I can understand where Ukraine's coming from about not compromising anything is because Russia has been at this whole thing trying to chip away at Ukraine for a long time, and they figure that even if they come to a compromise and settle this thing for now, and the fighting stops and people stop dying, Russia will simply try again in another year or two when they build up their forces once again after they recover from this, and they'll start it right back over again. And I can perfectly understand where they're coming from on that. On one hand, you know, everybody wants the dying to stop because Ukraine's going to still lose a lot of people, even though they're going to win this thing in the end. But, you know, I'm still on Ukraine's side 100% on their position.
Man, I don't think the Russians could ever start this war again in just a year or two, but especially with the losses they've taken. There's no way you can rebuild an army from how thoroughly they've been destroyed in 2 years. That's why you see countries that get into wars like these, like the Franco-Prussian War, and then the French don't get involved in a war for another 40 years because their military was so thoroughly destroyed that they have to rebuild everything from the ground up, and you can't really do that in just 2 years. It's just too fast. Like, hell, even the U.S. Navy can't even modernize a small fraction of the fleet without it taking nearly a decade. So rebuilding an entire military from the ground up would take decades at least. So they probably wouldn't fight a war for maybe another decade or two.
Maybe. I think personally they'd probably, like, I'll be honest, I don't know how long it takes to build up a military after such a major defeat like this one. But I would imagine that China or some external force would probably step in and help them rebuild faster because it benefits other countries like China for Russia to be in this very unstable position because it puts them in a better playing field.
Well, that wouldn't be putting them in an unstable position. That'd be putting them back in a stable position with a strong army, and that would give the Russians the leverage they need to once again start footing it to the Chinese if they need to.
Oh no, I would disagree. I would say that if a country's at war whatsoever, it's in a precarious spot, even if it is winning, because wars are very unstable by nature. It could go any direction depending on the day. So that would benefit China still if Russia was in any kind of war.
Well, yeah,
with
but we're saying that the war would be over then. They would be rebuilding a military. They're not at war anymore. And so the Chinese would be rearming them to become a strong, nearly independent country again, not really scared of anyone around them anymore, removing the nukes from the picture because they have a competent land army, well, a semi-competent land army again. And so there is no war. They would just be helping the Russians to stabilize themselves. So that way the Chinese have to sit there and deal with a Russia that has a strong conventional land army again to try and get resources through. And that wouldn't really be anything that the Chinese would want. The Chinese would want them weak, where they're dependent on them instead of the other way around.
Maybe so, maybe so.
But with that, I hope we addressed that fairly well. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and our last poll says Belgium is sending $100 million of seized Russian asset tax income to Ukraine. And will this become common? It looks like 74% said yes, it will become a trend. 6% said unsure, 17% said it's certainly possible, and 3% said no, these are isolated occurrences. And I think now that the U.S. has sent some money, and Belgium is now sending some money to Ukraine from seized Russian assets, this appears to be from income tax revenue. It looks like this will probably become a trend, and that's definitely a good thing because we've been advocating for a while for all the seized Russian asset money and the proceeds, while I stumble through that, be sent to Ukraine to help them rebuild. That seems like the fair thing to do. But Enforcer, what say you?
Could you reread that prompt?
Belgium is sending 100 million of seized Russian asset tax income to Ukraine, and will this become common?
I think it probably, not from Belgium, but from the rest of the world, it may become common. We're already seeing that starting to happen, so I think that will start to become a common thing for the next few years. And so with that, I hope that does address that poll fairly well, and we are now on into the questions themselves.
All right, so let me restructure the spreadsheet real quick. Sort from top to bottom. That's the function I'm looking for. And the very first super chat we have, jumping right back into them, is from none other than Backyard Racing, the in-channel and in-chat celebrity, who puts in a $100 super chat. And thank you very much, Backyard Racing, for the support. And they said, keep up the great work, guys, with your streams and fundraising. And let's hope and pray that Ukraine can continue to maintain the pressure that they got going right now. And I can't wait for the full force of their counteroffensive.
And I thank you so much for the mass amount of support, Backyard Racing, and thank you so much for enjoying the work we do. Everyone, whenever we see y'all, whenever we see you in here, Backyard Racing, we always ask you to do the Hot Wheels videos again, because we were not introduced to those until you were on this channel, and then I checked it out, and those were really cool. And you should do them again! And I have to say, I also thank you, from one YouTuber to another, for enjoying what we do, because we, of course, put a decent amount of effort into this every single day to make sure that it comes out at top-notch quality, and luckily, we usually meet the mark for most people. Sometimes, not so much, but then again, usually those people, they never find anyone that meets the mark and they're just unhappy. But still, thank you so much once again for enjoying everything we do. And I hope that Ukraine can maintain the pressure that they have going on right now, especially in Bakhmut. If we see the Russians strategically defeated in Bakhmut, we're probably going to see that the Russians no longer have the ability to really counter anything Ukraine's doing. We already know that their doctrine has largely gone defensive, and Bakhmut is a remnant of when the Russians were largely on the offensive. And so far, it's not really succeeded. They started this offensive in October, 8 months ago, and it's still not going anywhere. It's failing completely now. So I think we'll probably see that once the Ukrainians secure the initiative in Bakhmut, the Russians will go full defensive everywhere for the remainder of the war, and just hope that they can eventually either wear down the Ukrainians' willpower to keep the war going, or something similar. But I can't wait for the full counteroffensive either, because when it happens, it is going to be unbelievably large. It's going to be amazing, really. It's going to be like watching the Balaklia offensive all over again. And so with that, thank you so much once again, Backyard Racing, for that massive support and helping this channel to keep on rolling, because folks like you make this channel possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
And something real quick I saw interesting. Somebody made a comment in the live chat and was saying that they expected very big gains for the amount of money, the massive amount of money that we spent on Ukraine thus far from the U.S. I saw Kaltenberg say in response, he said, we've spent $1 trillion on Afghanistan and Iraq and not yet at $100 billion for Ukraine. And that is a good point, Kaltenberg. I will say, though, one distinction is the Afghanistan and Iraq situation was over the course of, what, was it 20 years or so?
Yes.
About 20 years?
I think we were in Afghanistan about 20 years.
About 20 years. So at the rate of spending we're doing on Ukraine, if this thing went on for 20 years, hypothetically, which we know it won't, I think we would outspend the Afghanistan and Iraq war altogether. But it's not going to go on for that long. So I think by pouring a ton of money in up front, we can go ahead and try to get this thing wrapped up. But the U.S. has to stop withholding equipment, or otherwise it's going to be useless.
And also, just to give another context there, wars are incredibly expensive. A lot of people don't know this unless we really look at wars a lot and study them. But most of the time, fighting large wars can usually bankrupt countries to where they really are not financially able to do anything after war. That's what led to Britain and France ending, I guess, their time as an empire after the First World War. And a lot of people don't really see that. But after World War I, British Empire 1924, I'll just put that in map so that way I can show you all this. And this was the British Empire in 1924 right there. And so the British controlled almost the entirety of East Africa, except for the small part here that was controlled by Italy. That's Ethiopia and Somalia. And they also control Somaliland, but that's beside the point. They also controlled the mandates of Palestine, Iraq, and well, actually Syria was French-controlled. They also controlled some parts of South America. I believe it's like British... I'm trying to think, British Guyana, I believe, and then also the Bahamas, Canada, Australia, India, and Pakistan, along with, I guess you could say, Burma, as they called it back in the day, and then also Papua New Guinea and a whole bunch of other stuff. They controlled a quarter of the landmass of the earth, but after the First World War, they didn't really have the finances to be able to hold this stuff up anymore. And so it started to become clear then, and a lot of people don't know that they were going to have to start chalking all this up and just throwing it to the wind. And so by the end of the First World War and in the 1920s, there were already conventions going on in the British Empire about how they were going to start releasing all of these colonies or dominions. That's how largely the Indians would start to get their independence around 1947, is that they were actually planned to have been given up in the early 1940s, really the late 1930s, but because of the Second World War, all of that was postponed, and the British Raj would continue to exist until the end of the Second World War years later. But still, wars are that bankrupting that entire empires, like the British Empire and the French Empire, would largely end up to start subsiding, fading, or falling in disrepair after the First World War, and then completely die after the Second World War because they were just no longer financially able to keep this stuff up. But anyways, moving on from that, the point of me saying that is that wars are expensive. And the Second World War, in 2019's dollars, cost the United States $4.7 trillion to fight the Second World War for only 4 years. We were spending about $1.2 to $1.3 trillion a year over the course of the Second World War. And that gives you an idea of how expensive a war can be to actually fight and win. And so when we say that the Ukrainians have $30 billion stockpiled for an offensive, it seems like a massive amount. It really is, especially for Ukraine, considering that's like 60% of the Russians' annual military budget that they have just stockpiled for an offensive. But in a war's big picture, that is a good amount of money, but it's not the amount that is really needed to completely follow through on a war. And so, with that, and also Dean Maxey said, is that World War II adjusted for inflation? Yes, that was adjusted for inflation. It cost about $4.7 trillion in today's money to fight that war, at least just for the U.S. alone. And then on top of that, we did the Lend-Lease and everything. But anyways, wars are incredibly expensive, and it's really hard to see a country like Ukraine win on just $30 billion. Now, if they were able to do it, you're probably going to be looking at one of the most cost-effective wars that have ever been fought in the modern world if it was only fought on $30 billion. But it, in reality, will probably take a lot more than that. And so with that...
real quick, I saw one other thing that I thought was very interesting in the live chat. This one was from Mark Colonel of the LSA. He said the numbers are not real. The U.S. is sending mostly defunct equipment, so this is not real money. And if it was 33% of it, I'd be shocked. And one thing I was thinking is the value of the equipment being sent to Ukraine, the public numbers, when we say we're sending, for example, $1 billion in military aid, is that aid calculated at the appraised value of the equipment, or is it at the new value of the equipment when it was bought new by the military?
I believe they're valuing it off of the purchase price when they originally bought it.
Ah, okay. Well, that definitely proves Mark's point then.
Yeah, and that's also kind of a weird thing because they like to say, you know, oh, the M113s are worth like $300,000, $400,000. It's like, yeah, but they've depreciated. I mean, like, these things are practically worthless now. You know, it's like, what are they, like $100,000 maybe at this point, because they're so they've been so run through at this point because they're so old. You know, so that is a good point. That is actually a good point. And thank you for bringing that up, Mark. That's a good way to look at it because it isn't actually the listed sticker price. They have everything that we're sending them has largely depreciated at this point, if you want to consider that as a factor. And so with that, hope that does address that fairly well as well. And were we addressing a super chat with that answer?
We were actually moving on to the next one.
All right. So with that, we are on to the next one. I think the last one we addressed was backyard racing, correct?
It was.
And so, once again, I thank you so much, Backyard Racing, for the support, because you have helped this thing to keep on running and helped this channel to keep on rolling. So with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, real quick, I have to make this point because it was on top of my mind before we move on to the next one. I've seen some people saying that Europe needs to step up and provide as much support as the U.S. has. But the catch is, since Mark brought that point up, if we've actually sent a lot less in real value in equipment and military aid, then we might be almost level with Europe at this point for the amount of equipment sent. So that might derail that argument almost completely.
That's true. And we really don't know how much the European stuff is valued at, because once you get into the idea of depreciating everything for what it's really worth now, then it becomes incredibly complicated to figure out how much worth we're actually sending versus how much they're sending. Because one thing we can say is that the Europeans have been sending some of their most modern stuff. The Challenger 2 is about as modern a tank as one can get. The Leopard 2A6 from Germany is the most modern that a tank can get. So, you know, that may factor in a lot to how much they've really sent versus how much we've really sent. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one, speaking of Mark, Colonel of the LSA, while I stumble through that, I think what it is we had pizza tonight, and it's not holding me over very well, and I'm getting hungry at this point, so my mind is starting to go early. But
And
Mark, Colonel of...
And
Yes.
I've got to be honest before we even get on to the next one. Matthew's known this because I've been saying it all day. I woke up today and I kind of felt feverish, and I'm still feeling sick. So if for some reason I'm coming off a little weird tonight, it's probably because I'm feeling sick and feverish still, because I've been feeling that way the whole stream. But with that, let's get on to that next one. That is from Mark, Colonel of the LSA.
And yes, this one is from Mark, Colonel of the LSA. He puts in a $55 super chat, and thank you, Mark, for the support once again. He says, happy birthday to Matt, and thank you. Nothing makes sense about the Storm Shadow. It's a low-flying stealth cruise missile, and I think it's something new.
And I thank you so much for the support. And the Storm Shadow is kind of new, but it has been in service with the British for a pretty good while, actually. I believe since the 90s. But let me make sure on that one. Let's see. It's been in service since 2002, so it's about 21 years old at this point. By military terms, this is a relatively new weapon system. And we can already see that one of them is on display at a museum, or at least a mock-up of it, most likely. But hang on. This thing is not $3 million. These things are only about 790,000 pounds, or 850,000 euros as of 2011. So they're not that expensive.
That's still pretty steep.
It's steep, but it's not like it's not like $3.5 million Iskander steep.
True.
So that is pretty interesting to note right there. We can also see a tornado right here carrying storm shadows. We can see them right there. But by and large, these are pretty modern missiles as far as they come. They're not they're new by military terms, but I guess you could say in like the concept of like normal new, these things are not new. They are pretty old. They're about as old as I mean, I'm trying to think. They were as old as me, actually, because I was born in 2002. So, you know, they're incredibly old. That's it, you know, because I'm reporting on the war. These things are old enough to report on the war as well. So I do thank you for the support. They are somewhat new in that regard, but they are not, I guess you could say, new enough that they couldn't be sent, because the Challenger 2 is also being sent by the British, and the Challenger 2 came around. Challenger 2, what? I can't speak tonight. But the Challenger 2 came around and was introduced in the service in when? So 1993. So it's just about 30 years old, and the Storm Shadow's about 20 years old. So this is still being sent. And the Javelin, I believe, is even newer than that. Let me make sure. Javelin missile. And when was that introduced in the service? The Javelin missile was introduced in 1996. So of a relatively similar year of being introduced in service. So with that, I would have to say it is new, but it is not new enough to not be sent. Still, I do thank you for the support, though, Mark, and I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again for being a massive supporter of this channel and helping us to keep this thing running. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is from Justice Ryan, who puts in a $50 super chat. And thank you, Justice Ryan, very much for the support. And also, it's good to see you once again. And he says, was Zelensky saying yesterday he's delaying the main counteroffensive because he needs more equipment true, or is it an intentional misdirection to catch the Russians by surprise?
And welcome back, Justice Ryan, and thank you so much for the support as well. To answer that question, it could be either. It could be serious, it could be a feint. Nobody really knows, because if it was clearly a feint, it wouldn't be a good feint, because it would be see-through. And if he really does need equipment, that is kind of weird to telegraph that to the Russians that it's not happening yet. So it's kind of on the fence. It could be either one. I'm honestly kind of leaning towards it being a feint because I can't really see them needing more equipment. They've already done counteroffensives with less and have done incredibly well. And while they are waiting on equipment and they always could use more, I don't really think they're going to be needing an excessive amount of equipment. I think they already have plenty, in my opinion, so it may be a feint. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling. Of course, welcome back. It's been a long time since we've seen you in the Lee Spring Army, and I hope that wherever you've been having a good time, and that you've been doing pretty well and have been safe, and that you're back in the LSA for good. And also, I see, let me see real quick. I saw something in the live chat that I was going to address. Where in the world is it?
I saw something.
I saw something and I don't see it anymore. Oh yeah, I see it now. Some people are going, "Oh my God, he was born in 2002. How old is he?" I'm 21. You know, and that's usually something I think that our haters focus on the most is how old I am. So you know, we usually don't mention that much anymore, but it is what it is. You know, it's not like I'm going to stop being 21 anytime soon until my next birthday. But you know, it's something that we don't really harp on much anymore because people always want to act like because you're 21, you don't know what you're talking about. And then the people out there who are like 30, you know, and ended up being, I don't know, like a potato peeler in a kitchen for the 7th Cavalry, they apparently know more than just your average person, you know? And so we usually don't bring that up much. But anyways.
I'm 22, but I sound like I could be on the border of 60 with a pack of cigarettes a day.
Yeah, and you know, and speaking of which, real quick, that's something that always gets me a little bit is when people come in here. It doesn't get me in a bad way; it just gets me kind of like in a laughing way when someone comes in here and they go, that's not true because so and so said this, and he was in the army. You know, like I have to say this. You know that like enlisted soldiers that are like at the level of E4 and lower have no idea how strategy works. They don't go to war college and learn how grand strategy works because that's not their job. Their job is to just be in the field and fire the rifle where they're told to, and to just maybe emphasize a squad formation or something like that. They're not going to be getting into grand strategy. This is not something they're taught about. And on top of that, anyways, generals who are taught that get it wrong a lot. Look at Milley. He gets almost half of everything wrong. So, you know, I'm not one to sit there and go, oh, you know, because the E3 cook told me that, you know, the Russians are doing this. I'm sure that he knows that because the potatoes told him that. You know, I'm not really into that. But anyways, I hope that does address that fairly well. Felt like I had to go into that because usually I'll say something and then someone always wants to come here and go, so-and-so said this. And, you know, either, usually they're not like a NCO even, or an officer, and so it's like that's not even anything they had to know about in the military. They're just, you know, acting like they do because they were in the military, and they, you know, think that people in the public will believe them because they were in the military, and people usually do. I mean, hell, look at Vasquez. Look at James Vasquez. That's the best example right there. That guy lied about his military service. He never even made it to E5, which he said he was one. And people would come in and tell me, you're wrong because he's there and he said it's this way and he was in the special forces and crap. I don't know what it is with that. You know, I honestly feel like I believe people, even if they're not in the military, if what they're saying makes sense. I really believe people in anything as long as what they're saying makes sense. I'm never into going, you know, because that guy is such and such thing, he'll know this. Like, hell, I'm a major in history. But to be honest with you, my history degree doesn't even really cover most of the stuff I talk about. I went and learned that stuff on my own. The college degree didn't teach me anything about this stuff at all. And I wouldn't really expect anyone with a history degree to be able to competently tell me everything about history, because usually they get very focused in on a single subject. So they may not know about war at all. They may tell you about the Heian period in Japan, you know, for all I know. But anyways, with that, hope that addresses that fairly well. And we're on to the next one.
And someone said in the live chat, Enforcer Matt looks like a teen, but sounds like an old man. And you know, it's a strange situation to deal with in everyday life, because when people look at me, they think, that kid looks like he's in high school. But we're both about to start law school, so Enforcer looks like he's about 30 or so. I look like I'm about 18, but I don't sound it. It's kind of a weird mix we got going on here, but it works.
Yeah, it works. It works. We were actually out doing something with the neighbors, and they didn't know our age. They said they thought I was older than Matthew, and we're 18 months apart. I'm 18 months younger than him. I was like, dang. I was like, I can't win for nothing. It's the goatee. If I shaved the goatee off, I wouldn't look that old. I would look younger than Matthew probably. But it's the goatee for certain. That's what does it. That was actually the point when I did that, because way back in the day, I was trying to do something where it was beneficial to look older, and so I grew out a goatee for that reason, and then I just kept it because honestly, it looks better than being clean shaven. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Mark, Colonel of the LSAV, also Slava Ukraini, but he puts in a $40 super chat this time, and he says, why do you keep saying it's a Storm Shadow? It could be a GLSDB, or 2 would make a lot more sense.
Now, Mark, I thank you so much for the support. The reason why we're saying it's a Storm Shadow is because from what we were able to tell, it was not engaged by air defense. We have seen a ground-launched small-diameter bomb engaged by air defense before. We have been able to confirm that one of those did hit a target, and we did see Russian air defense try and fail to intercept that ground-launched small-diameter bomb. We didn't see anything happen with this one, though. We never got any video footage of any missiles trying to intercept it and shoot it down, or any ground fire being directed at it. And considering that the Storm Shadow is stealth capable, which makes it much more difficult to detect on radar and therefore shoot down, we are going with it was most likely a Storm Shadow. On top of that, it just for that reason, it just seems to be the case. I really don't have any other reason than it was not engaged by air defense. And I think that if it was a normal ground-launched small-diameter bomb, which is not stealth and can be picked up on radar, it would have been engaged by air defense. Whether it was successful or not, it most likely wouldn't have been, but it would have proven the fact that it was detected on radar, and therefore not a Storm Shadow. And that's why we're kind of going with that idea right now. But once again, we're not really sure because we haven't seen any clear fragments or parts of this missile or ordnance to show that it really was a Storm Shadow or a ground-launched small-diameter bomb or a Hram or a Grem or even a Totska that somehow just got really lucky and flew all the way to Luhansk. But with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope that does address that fairly well. But that's why we're kind of calling it a Storm Shadow at this point. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And Mark follows up with another $40 super chat and says, I'm just trying to annoy you, and I still insist it was not a Storm Shadow.
And I thank you so much for the support, Mark. Trying to annoy us. Why? But still, I'm just kidding. And it may have not been a Storm Shadow. I'm going to stick to my opinion. It probably is, mainly for the fact it was not engaged by air defense. Everything gets engaged by air defense. Even HIMARS gets engaged by air defense almost half of the time. But this one was not engaged by air defense at all, and it was flying a very clear path. Now, if we were to assume the information is true, and that this AGM-160 was shot down, because it kind of looks like it was, or it maybe just crashed, I can't really tell. It also, it may have been engaged by air defense. It was picked up. The other one, however, from what we could tell in the video footage, it wasn't. So that's why we're kind of assuming it is still a Storm Shadow, but it may have not been. There is a chance that it wasn't, because we haven't seen any verifiable proof of what it really is. But with
that, I definitely wouldn't take the person's word for it in this caption, because they spelled supposedly.
Supposedly. Man, I tell you, man, I go down to that Italian restaurant, I get myself some fettuccine and supposedly, man. That stuff delicious.
That smells odd.
Man, I'm telling you, man, I was sweating like a gesundheit after I ate that stuff. I'm telling you, oh God. But anyways, with that, thank you so much once again for the support, Mark. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And our next one goes to John Castellanos, who puts in a $30 super chat. And thank you, John, very much for your support. He says, Enforcer, long time. Thoughts if the counteroffensive, if successive, no matter where Zaporizhia, Kherson, Bakhmut, will it impact Putin's control between Russian Ministry of Defense and the nationalists, Wagner, Gherkin, and others, protest at home?
Can you translate that one for me real quick? Because I think I'm not understanding it.
So I think he meant to say, what are your thoughts if the counteroffensive is successful, no matter what happens in Zaporizhia, Kherson, or Bakhmut, and will it impact Putin's control between the Russian Ministry of Defense and the free agents like Wagner and Gherkin and others.
Now, if the offensive is successful, and well, really honestly, just talking about not even the large counteroffensive, but just the push we're seeing in BAKHMUT right now, that is already eroding the trust in between the Wagner unit and the Ministry of Defense very visibly through Prigozhin. So I think that at that point, Wagner may try and withdraw itself completely from the war, or intentionally sabotage itself in one form or another, just through what's happening in BAKHMUT. Now, if the big push happens and it blows through the lines, we're probably going to see Kadyrov just disappear. He's not going to leave or anything. He's just going to try and bury himself in the background and not really make himself visible. He'll probably try and do that. Everyone really will try and do that. The Gazprom PMCs may even try and leave as well and just hang out in Russia and wait for the inevitable demise from what most people are thinking in Russia. That's probably what we'd be seeing at that point. I don't think we'll be seeing those guys immediately turn, but they will all be sitting back and waiting for the first move to happen so that way they can all kick it off and start going to town. Now, the Ministry of Defense, they will always try and stay loyal to Putin for the most part. They're probably not the ones that will have to be worried about too much, but they will certainly be in such a bad state they won't really be able to do anything if an uprising occurs in Russia. And also, most of their army would still be in Ukraine, or at least the fighting parts of their army would be in Ukraine, and they wouldn't really be able to do anything. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Hopefully we understood that correctly. And thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
All right, and the next one goes to Psyops. He puts in two $20 super chats, and thank you very much, Psyops, for the support. Hey! And on each of them, he had me remove the comments and say live chat, please. So he's getting two live chat questions, and these two are sponsored by Psyops. And the very first one is going to go to, let's see, Black and White, who says, Matt, do you really think that the Russian citizens are aware of what's really happening yet?
I think the Russian citizens are certainly aware of what's happening in BAKHMUT. They were aware of what happened in Balaklia, which was a bit of an upset, but BAKHMUT has had so much put on about what's going on there that now that the Ukrainians are pushing them back and everyone's visibly freaking out everywhere except for the Ministry of Defense, the Russian public has to know what's going on there. Even the propagandists are talking about what's happening there and demanding that the Ukrainians be nuked for it. And that shows us that the whole Russian public must know what's going on, and it must be a pandemonium over there about the occurrence of the war and what's happening at this moment. So with that, I hope that answers that one fairly well, and we are on to the second live chat from Psyops.
And this one goes to Adig, who says, do you think that the Ukrainians will be able to capture Prigozhin alive, or is he the kind of general that doesn't stay with his troops so out of reach?
Prigozhin seems to be staying with his troops for the most part. We have seen him leave a couple of times recently to go into Russia and open up new cemeteries, but he doesn't really seem to be leaving them, and I believe that's because he doesn't really trust anyone anymore in the Russian government, and he's relying on the Wagner unit for his protection, as well as trying to continue on the fight in BAKHMUT. So he's probably going to stay there with him, because otherwise, if he leaves, and he pretty much leaves his entire bodyguard force in BAKHMUT to be destroyed or surrender, he's going to be completely helpless when he returns to Russia and there's no one around at all to protect him. So I have a feeling that he'll probably stay with the Wagner, even if it means he surrenders to the Ukrainians, because he'll probably have a better chance of surviving in Ukrainian hands than he would just returning to Russia, at this point at least, from what we're seeing visibly, physically. But with that, I hope that does answer that live chat fairly well, and thank you so much for the support, Psyops, both of those times, and helping us to keep this channel running, and I hope we address those live chats fairly well. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address both of those fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Marion Deemert, who puts in a $20 super chat. And thank you, Marion, very much for the continuous support. And Marion says, these ruins used to be homes. I just can't wrap my head around the loss of people and habitats, and war stinks.
And I would have to certainly agree with you. War sucks. We try and make it suck less on this channel, but it does suck. There's no question about it. Wars are a terrible thing. Wars are to be avoided unless it's the final resort. For the Russians, it wasn't really a final resort, but they still went and did one nonetheless, which is kind of weird in the modern world, because usually wars are always fought as some kind of a last resort. Well, actually, I can think of many that aren't a last resort. Iraq and Afghanistan, a few of them. But, you know, anyways, I would say it's a terrible thing. And when you see wars like this occurring in front of you, and especially when they're heavily filmed and heavily showcased around the world, you really get an idea as to why wars are terrible. And one thing that has the one thing that's always talked about, and I always find it interesting how Americans can kind of be detached from realities that are around in the rest of the world. But, you know, a lot of Americans in the modern political sphere on both sides believe that there will be some kind of a civil war in the future, and they beg for it sometimes on both sides. You know, if you get far enough over into the extremes of both sides, they're both begging for some kind of a civil war to kick off so that way they can kill the others. What I don't think they understand, though, is that the wars are not fun at all, and especially if you're talking about a civil war that would happen in the United States, because it's not going to be one where there's defined lines. It's not going to be like a civil war like the first Civil War where there's a little Mason-Dixon line and everyone goes, oh, that's where the line is. No, everyone's going to just be shooting each other everywhere. It's going to be like the Balkans for the next decade. I don't know why people want wars, because honestly, if there was a way, and, you know, there wasn't a way because the Russians were adamant on having this war should have been avoided at all costs. Wars are horrendous. Wars are terrible, especially for the people who are not fighting them. Civilians die, or citizens die, at a much higher rate than the soldiery die, when you really break down the numbers. In the Second World War, I believe for every soldier that died, nearly 2 or 3 citizens of every country died. The U.S. was very lucky in that regard. Almost no one died here because, you know, we weren't actually involved in any kind of war being bombed by anyone. But that stuff's, it's horrendous. It's terrible. And hopefully, through our efforts of supporting the Ukrainians, the war can end. And of course, some people also get caught up in this. Our support does make this war go on longer because the Ukrainians aren't losing the war, they're winning it. But it's either they win the war and they go through this suffering now to make sure that they don't suffer forever, or they lose and they suffer forever, most likely. And there's some kind of... Because if the Russians took over this country, to explain what will most likely happen, the Russians wouldn't take the whole thing over. They would probably keep the borders that it had in 1991, but it would become a puppet of the Russian government. They may actually keep Crimea, though. The Russians would keep Crimea. The rest of it, though, would just become part of another Ukraine. They would put in some kind of a violent, repressive government that would probably go around imprisoning people, executing them in the streets, that kind of stuff. It would be a reign of terror for the large part. It would be absolute hell on earth in Ukraine for however long that regime would survive, which would probably be for decades. And that is what the Ukrainians don't want. That's what the Ukrainians are fighting against. Because it's either they face the music now and they take the Russians head on and try and win this war, which they are, or they lose it and then their people suffer for decades, most likely. And they would rather go with the option of suffering greatly for a short while than suffering greatly for a long while. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that fairly well, and I certainly have to agree with you. War is a terrible thing. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have another super chat from Backyard Racing, who this time puts in a $50 super chat. And thank you very much, Backyard Racing, for the extra support. And they said, you guys need to add video to your streams. We want to see your live reactions to the content being viewed and the comments to it. And oh Lord, we can't have video.
No, not today. You want to see your live reaction? I wouldn't actually want to do that because, to be honest with you, we are not, like, I will be honest with you, I'm not going to speak on Matthew's end, but I am not visibly presentable for a video camera because usually by this point, we've already had really long days. And so having to be like all made up, like with gel on my hair, because I have to have gel on my hair to make it look the way it does on camera. And, you know, wearing like double layered shirts, because whenever I'm wearing those polos in those videos, I'm actually wearing a t-shirt under it, and that actually gets kind of warm pretty quickly. So I'm just wearing a white t-shirt right now, like one of the ones you wear under a suit. I would not be presentable for a camera, to be honest with you. And also on top of that, I don't like how that adds an extra layer. It honestly feels kind of narcissistic to me, because, like, you know, people start focusing on us more so than the war itself. And that's also why we didn't do it at the start. And another thing that I don't like about it is that I have to start thinking about how I look on camera. Like, is my reaction right? Do I look good to the camera? Do people like how I look? That adds in a whole other very difficult layer beyond just articulating the news and the info that we're putting out. And so that's why we've never really done video. It's more so because I think it is kind of narcissistic, especially with war footage. Like, if you're here for reactions, then yeah, that would make sense. But it's war, and I don't really want people looking at me and going, "Oh, is he crying enough for the slain, or is he laughing enough at this? And what does he look like?" I honestly don't like the idea of it. But still, it would be an interesting idea. Now, when we do live shows, what are you laughing at?
Oh goodness, somebody. Oh goodness, I'll say it. Somebody mentioned that guy off of CNN that was on live camera.
Oh no!
Guy?
Oh yeah, the one. What are you doing? Yeah, that one.
Jeez.
Oh man,
oh my
goodness. Dang, man, that was rough when you think about it. And then they rehired him just to fire him, man. Like, dang.
Yeah, they rehired him to drag him through the mud a little extra and then get rid of him the second time.
They did him dirty, man. Honestly, he kind of deserved it for what he did on air. And that's the quality of news.
It was messed up.
That's the quality of news you get from CNN. But you never have to worry about that here, y'all, because Bert and Ernie's got you covered.
Hey.
But anyways, I hope that does address that fairly well, Backyard Racing, as why we don't do video stuff, at least on the normal shows. Now, we will do them on the live shows when we do those again. We have to figure out when to do those again, because now the short video summaries are kind of like filling up that slot, that time slot that would have been in. So we will probably have to figure out how to do this on a Monday night, or something like that. But that's why we generally don't do it. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, Backyard Racing, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope that explains kind of why we don't do it that way. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And also, if you don't know what we're talking about and you want to get the reference, please see my live chat that's put in. But anyways, up next, we have a $20 super chat from Cersify, who sadly does not leave a comment. But Cersify, thank you very much for the support. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I got to thank you so much, Cersify, for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. You didn't throw in a comment, but the support means a lot to us, and it does help us to keep this thing rolling. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, before we move on to the next one, people are asking what the CNN thing is. And to try and explain it in the cleanest terms possible, there was a guy called Jeffrey Toobin who was on air, live on air, and he was in a panel, and you started to hear a little clapping noise. Someone was clapping, but it wasn't with their hands, and I guess you could say it involved suffocating a chicken. You know, if you're catching my drift.
No, he went and grabbed a bottle of hand lotion and something else.
Oh my God. Well, there you have it. There's a story. And everyone's like, hold up, what's he doing? And then they fired him, and then they rehired him, and then they dragged him through the mud a little bit, and then they fired him again. But that's the story.
I don't even know what the hell was going through that individual's mind, but that was messed up.
I don't really know, man. Honestly, it feels like that Russian blogger that we watched that saw that girl in the crowd, and he was still showing his screen on air, and it showed him like cropping the picture and everything. That was pretty rough.
Yeah.
That was a pretty rough one too. But that's kind of the story of what happened on CNN, and that's the kind of journalistic integrity you can always count on from the mainstream news. And also, by the way, let me say this real quick, because I know when we say that, someone's about to go, hey, you know, say something about us. We also say that about Fox too, because believe it or not, Fox is more popular than CNN. So if anyone would be the mainstream, they actually are the mainstream because they're the biggest one. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have another super chat from Psyops yet again. And thank you, Psyops, for the support once more. And he puts in a $20 super chat. And says, the time has come, my friends, for me to leave. The kingdom of Hyrule is under attack once again, and I must defend the world from the tyranny of Ganon. And I'm sure you understand, and I'll be back in a week. It's my one video game I play. Hurt.
And I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope you have a fun time down there, though. And make sure to come right back, because we'll be more than happy to have you back. And so make sure to stay safe as well, because whenever taking a trip, you always got to be safe. Even in the United States, because you travel outside of where you know, who knows what will happen to you. You're a stranger there. You're a stranger amongst a bunch of other people. So always make sure to be careful. But thank you so much once again for support. Hope I addressed that fairly well. And Matthew, I just found out that... let's see, Bobby was watching, is he actually just sent me a text that's just saying suffocating the chicken. I was like, oh, he's watching. But with that, we're on to the next one. Thank you once again for the support.
And yes, now everybody knows that story. And I'm sure everybody right now is opening a separate tab just to look it up and find out the rest of the details.
Oh,
but
man. And
it's
God bless you.
unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And God help you all who go and watch that video. It's not like graphic or anything, but it's disturbing to say the least. At least it's not as disturbing as that one video that came out from Congress Matthew, that you know, that one. That was just disturbing.
No.
Like, you know, that one is scarring. And we're not even going to go into the story of that one. If you know the noise, I'm so sorry that you do. But that was just mentally scarring. Anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to Luis Vesquez, who puts in a $20 super chat and says, "Keep up the great work, guys, and Slav Ukraine."
Hey, and thank you so much for the support, Lewis, and of course, helping this channel to keep on running, and thank you for enjoying what we do, and of course, helping this channel to keep on rolling. And of course, Slav Ukraine, and long live the Lee Spring Army. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And the next one goes to Alex Wolf, who puts in a $10 super chat and says, "I've been watching After Hours and was very sick for 9 days. Wife was injured by a gas stove explosion." And my goodness, I'm sorry to hear that, by the way. Bandages 3 times a day, plus taking care of the daughter and doing my work and my wife's work. And great work, by the way.
Goodness, I hate to hear that. A gas stove explosion. I've never heard of that before. That is insane. I didn't know that they could explode that violently. And I hope she's all right. I mean, that sounds rough as hell. I mean, I have a lot of questions about that, but I hope she's doing okay. And you've definitely had your hands full on top of being sick. All that happened, and I hope everything's going fine over there, because that sounds like hell in a handbasket. But I thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I hope that it's been a bit of a reprieve, because it sounds like you've been having a really tough time. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. Make sure to take care of yourselves over there, because y'all are having a really tough time over there. And thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. I gotta say, I'm completely blown away of a gas stove explosion.
We almost had that happen in Mississippi when we went to our grandmother's house. Something had happened. A storm had gone through. The ceiling had fallen in and had damaged the gas line going to the stove, and it was leaking. The entire house was full of gas, and I was the one who said, "Don't light a match. I think there might be gas in here." And everybody said, "You're crazy. I don't believe you're crazy."
No. Remember, Matthew? It was Nanny. She said, "Matthew, go and grab a match." And we were like, no, what? Because
I'm like, look, I'm 10 years old, and I know not to light a match, because I hear some gas hissing, and that whole house was full of it. If she'd have lit that match, that house would have gone up like a building in BAKHMUT. It would have been everywhere.
Now, it wouldn't have been like a napalm explosion or anything, but everything would have started to catch on fire. That would be a certainty. And then your hair would catch on fire and everything. I mean, it would be rough. It would be bad. On top of like the flash burn, that would happen. The whole thing would have been rough. But I got to tell you, that is insane though, and I hope y'all are well over there, because that's just really rough. And so with that, we are on to the next one. But thank you so much once again for support and enjoying what we do, and I hope it's made the night pass by a little bit better. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from Jay, who says, "B-Day for me and Matt, and Ellis Marine Corps since day 3. And happy birthday to you."
And happy birthday to you. And that's all I'm doing. But thank you so much, Jesse, for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. It's great to know you've been a part of the Lee Spring Marine Corps since day 3. A true old guard, even by the original standards of the old guard. And I got to thank you so much once again for being here with us tonight as we cover another monumental day in the news. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope we addressed that fairly well. And we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
All right, and also we have a $10 super chat from Blanky, and I was debating whether or not to read this one off, because we got a second one that was very, very pointed and kind of rude to an extent, but I'll read this one off anyway. And Blanky said, "Russia doesn't even want to think about the U.S. Navy."
Oh no, they don't want to think about the U.S. Navy at all. And so with that, I thank you for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Lisa Crane, who puts in a $10 super chat and says, "Slav Ukraine."
And Slav Ukraine. And thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. because you help us to keep on saying Slava Ukraini and also running this stream. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Catfish Avenger, who puts in a $10 super chat and says, tell us about the Patreon. Name that yacht. Niner.
That would be an interesting name for a yacht. And also, we do have a Patreon. I will. That's one thing that we don't really talk about a lot on stream. But we do have our Patreon link in our videos and also on our Twitter. So if anyone's like on our Twitter and they just watch our, they look at our Twitter and they like it, they can support us through the Patreon. And if you watch our videos, you can also support us there. The links are there. We're never going to put one in a live stream though, because I always said that the live streams would only be supported off of live chats, so we don't actually plug the Patreon in our live stream descriptions. We actually never will. But if you ever watch our videos and you want to help our video projects to keep going and also help our Twitter to keep rolling, you can support us through the Patreon, because it's the same Patreon for both the Twitter and the videos. So we do have one. It's just that we don't really make it a big deal for the stream. Well, actually, you don't even talk about it at all on the stream, because I made a guarantee at the start of the war. The only way people would be able to support us on the live stream is through the super chats. And so even if we do have a Patreon, we don't plug it here. It's only a strictly video Twitter thing. But with that, I do thank you so much once again for the support. I'm going to have to go back to calling you Fushicone, man, because I only remember you as Fushicone. But still, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling. And I hope we addressed that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Breakout Blake, who says, I've been watching since, let's see. Let me send this one over to you.
All right, and it's going up for review. Boom, 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 boom. Let's see. What does that mean?
I don't know. It's kind of sketching me out a little bit.
It kind of is, because I've heard a reference to that before, and it's something, but I do thank you for the support, and it's good to hear that you have been here for a whole year, and so thank you so much for being an old guard, and we will make sure to take a question from the live chat, and of course, Slava Ukraini. And so with that, what do we got for the live chat?
All right, and our question for the live chat goes to Dean Maxey, who says, how close is Putin to a full mobilization?
Probably, really, they've been on the cusp of that for a good long while. But in reality, might not happen, because that would be a bad look to the Russian public, probably make them lose a lot of support for the war. So we may not ever see a full mobilization, but they are very close to it, and they have been for probably about 6 or 7 months at this point. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Thank you so much once again for sponsoring that live chat, and I hope we addressed that fairly well. And we're on to the next one.
And also, by the way, I saw, let's see. Oh, I just lost it. I saw Breakout Blake say the camera days, meaning from our live little thing. What was it called? Podcast?
The podcast.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't know what that meant at the first part. It was just a little bit weird. Yeah, well, weird to us because we didn't know what it meant. But that is really cool. That means he would have been around since like the day 200s, I think.
I think so.
And so, man, you've actually been around for a pretty good while, almost a year at this point. And so with that, thank you so much once again for being here that long. And thank you so much once again for the support as well. Sorry we misunderstood that. We just, unfortunately, we didn't know what it meant. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And Backyard Racing puts in a $50 super chat. And Backyard Racing, I have to first tell you, that was extremely generous to send in the $50. But I have to say that the happy birthday that everyone says to me is a running channel joke. It's not actually my birthday. But he said, happy birthday, man, and take this cash and have a dinner together, just the two of you, at Logan Steakhouse. And we will have that dinner at Logan Steakhouse in honor of my future birthday, because right now, I think I'm going on my 3,586th birthday today. But thank you very much for the support, and that was very kind of you. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I also have to thank you so much for the support at the Backyard Racing. And sadly, it's not his birthday yet. Mine actually came and went. I actually was on stream when my birthday came around and went. I was actually on that night. So what was funny about that is that I woke up, I had my birthday for like an hour or two, and then I immediately got to work and started making the next live stream happen. And no one even knew that my birthday was that day. The reason why we did that is because it's a bit of a security thing. We don't want people knowing my exact birthday, but we will be having an official one here in June. We've got to come up with the birthday. We're going to just have it for both of us. It's going to be both of our official birthday, and we'll celebrate our birthdays then, completely separated from our real birthdays, because, you know, just not giving the specific day, but mine was in February and Matthew's is in July. So, you know, there you have it. But our actual birthday will be our official birthday for the channel will be in June. But with that, thank you so much once again for support Backyard Racing. We will save that for when Matthew's when the official birthday comes around. Well, I guess we'll celebrate a birthday then. But with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on rolling. Because folks like you not only keep the Hot Wheels rolling around the tracks in the backyard, but also help this channel to keep on rolling as well. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
All right, and up next we have a $10 super chat from Psyops once again, and he says Psyops is at a bachelor party. Who wants me to? Let's see. It's scaring me. It's scaring me. So I'm going to send over to the enforcer.
Boom, 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 boom. It's scaring me. It's scaring me. Get it away from me. But still, thank you for the support. I don't know if we will be able to read that one off though, because it does seem to be has a little bit of a, let's see what innuendo in it, I guess you could say, would be the best word for it. And we usually try and keep things clean. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. We will get a live chat in its stead though. And so with that, what we got for a live chat, Matthew?
All right, and the live chat question goes to Alex Wolf, who says a defector stated that Putin stays in his bunkers and has fake identical rooms built to make him look like he is going to different locations, even fake flights from the location to the next.
Interesting. That might be true. Who knows? And I thank you so much for the support once again, and also for sponsoring that live chat, because that is interesting here. We can't really confirm whether that is true or not, but it may be, and the thought of it alone is thought-provoking. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
All right, and also Mark Scholar is absolutely not a scholar. What the hell is he talking about? He said Ukraine is losing more than 10,000 NATO soldiers and mercenaries near Bakhmut. I've never heard such a crazy statement in my life.
Man, NATO soldiers. Just hold on, NATO soldiers. Dang, man. Stop the slaughter. That's it. Stop the slaughter. Oh my God, Matthew, they're running them right into traps. They're just running them right into body pits of dead bodies. They're going to fall inside of them because they're rotten and drown in the crap. But anyways,
if there were 10,000 NATO soldiers in Bakhmut, the Russians would not even have dirt to stand on at this point.
Man, if there were 10,000 NATO soldiers in Bakhmut, I don't even think we would be talking about the war right now. It would have been over.
Yeah, it would have been long time over.
Yeah, long time over. Me and war, long time. But with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a $10 super chat from Psyops once again, who says, show me Ukrainian tractor videos or else. And the else meaning a Shiba update. How's the little puppy doing? And this is for the bone fund. And he puts in parentheses, dog bone. And he says he's too young for the other kind. What does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah.
I don't know.
Please clarify. But I do thank you for the support, Sibs. And to answer the question about how Shiba is doing good. She's doing great, actually. The scab has already fallen off, and her fur is growing out on her leg, her tuft, and also her head. She's back to her normal self now, except for the missing fur. And we've been doting on her a whole lot ever since then, because she's just a little baby. We're gonna eventually put those puppies on video. And when we do, I'm gonna say, how do you like them puppies? But anyway, so that, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope we addressed that fairly well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
Excuse me. And we have another super chat from Psyops, who puts in a $10 super chat and says, Did you know that the enforcer and enforcer matter are single? Can't confirm or deny. He says, shoot your shot on Twitter. They need a strong partner to teach them the ways of the world.
Well, I thank you for the support, helping this channel to keep on running, and interesting comments, I have to say, Subs. But with that, thank you so much once again for support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Catfish Avenger once again, who puts in a $10 super chat. And I think I butchered the last one, so I'm going to let the enforcer give it a crack and see if he can do it.
All right, and so we got one coming over to review, and let's see. Try again. Name the yacht Neener Neener. Long E sound as in seek. As in, I got something that is yours. Neener Neener. Well, I thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I've never heard anyone say that, actually. I've always heard, nah, 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 nah. I've always heard that, but I've never heard Neener Neener. That sounds almost like a radar alert or something like that. Like when a missile starts coming towards you and the little computer goes, and you go, oh crap, and you start popping flares and chaff. You start cranking the jet so that way the missile loses momentum. But anyways, I do thank you so much for the support and helping this channel keep on running, and I hope that was what you were looking for. And if so, interesting name for the yacht. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running.
Yes, indeed. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Jason Carpenter, who says, I appreciate you guys, and I pray for a speedy end to this war.
And thank you so much for the support. And we also hope for a speedy end to this war. Everyone we ever run into that we know in real life always asks us, what are we going to do after the war ends? Honestly, the war will have ended. We'll be moving on. That's reality. Of course, we'll keep the YouTube channel running. We'll just be moving on a lot of the content into other stuff. But I would hope that the war ends. Honestly, whenever we watch the stuff happening in BAKHMUT, I sit there and think, maybe it's not going to be momentous to where they go all the way to Luhansk in like 3 days, but maybe it'll be enough that the war ends, or they go to the negotiating table and the ceasefire is agreed on, or something like that. We hope for the war to end as well. And, while we've done amazing things throughout it, things like this must end, and hopefully sooner rather than later. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Right, and up next we have a $5 super chat from Slava Something, Sith Lord of LSA, who says, I visited my brother in St. Petersburg, and we started putting stickers of fake rubles on flat ground surfaces in the city. Time to start a civil war.
That is a way to get Russians to kill each other. Oh, bled! I don't have to go into silvers, bled. Get out of the way. And then they try and pick it up, and it's just stuck to the floor. And that is interesting. Good, cool to hear you're in St. Petersburg as well, by the way. I hope you're having fun out there. And also, Matthew, I was just realizing, you can actually tell how big St. Petersburg was before Soviet times, because you can tell by the older buildings. So St. Petersburg was only like this big. That's not really that big of a city.
That isn't. And there is a place called St. Petersburg in Florida, right?
Yeah, there is. I think it's south of of Tampa. Yeah, here it
threw
is.
Me off when I was looking at that one. I was thinking, wait a minute, am I thinking about the right thing?
Yeah, but this St. Petersburg is way better than the Russian St. Petersburg. Let me tell you. You want to see St. Petersburg? Here's St. Petersburg. We got it all here in America. Yeah, baby! Versus nasty, stinky, poo-poo Russian St.
Let me tell you, the property values in St. Petersburg and Florida are a lot higher than in Russia. I can tell you that without even knowing it.
So here's the stinky St. Petersburg in Russia. Ew. Dude, honestly, this kind of looks bleak. Look at that. They have never pressure washed this building.
That is rough.
That's rough. And I remember, Matthew, back in the day. Well, actually, I remember this. Matthew and my mom used to have a thing of watching YouTube videos of foreign countries and people walking through the cities. And they always choose the nicest spots and also get a camera lens that makes it look just a little bit better, if you know what I mean. And so they would always be going, man, countries like Russia, they even look better than the United States. Look at this. And then you look at the real St. Petersburg, which is stuff like this. It is like, hell no, it's not better. This is worse, and this is not that far out of downtown. Oh. Huh. Okay. All right.
I was reading the live chat, so I was thinking, just go, oh.
oh, oh. Sound like that robot made on the Jetsons when it got depressed. Oh, or whatever the hell it did. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support. And I hope you're having fun out there too. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from that guy. Yes, I'm that guy, pal. Who puts in a $5 super chat and says, hang in smoke from 2 launches, same plane.
And I thank you for the support. That may be the case. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, CK Bold puts in a $5 super chat and says, take a live chat question. And of course, CK Bold, we will. And thank you very much for the support as always. And let me get rid of this bot real quick. There we go. And the live chat question goes to David L., who says, Enforcer, what is your confidence that the general public actually knows what has been shipped already to Ukraine? Furthermore, American military doctrine is able to fight 2 rival fronts.
And that is true, and that's something that I'm always emphasizing, is that we didn't fight World War II fighting just the Germans or just the Japanese. We fought both of them at the same time on 2 totally different sides of the world, and ended up winning in both of them. Well, also we had a lot of help from the British and French in Europe, but, you know, largely against Japan, we ended up fighting them almost completely on our own. And that's always something that I think is very important to emphasize. Now, in the truth or the reality of what the public knows about what we're sending, there are things that we send to Ukraine that people do not know about, and we've seen that as time has passed. Like, the best example was the AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missile. Nobody ever heard about that being sent over. It was never officially stated, yet it made it there, and the Ukrainians have had a lot of them and have been using loads of them. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much, CK Bull, for sponsoring that live chat, and I hope we address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a $5 super chat from Catfish Avenger once again, who says, if Ukraine agreed to become a U.S. territory like Puerto Rico, is that a pathway into NATO, and can foreign powers attack Puerto Rico without repercussion?
I would say it may be, well, it would be a pathway into NATO because it would be a part of U.S. territory, so it would be. But the Ukraine couldn't. It wouldn't be an easy thing at all, and I think that's something that the United States would shoot down practically immediately. Is making Ukraine a territory, because then you have to ask the question, because it's not like Puerto Rico, where it is a single contained unit. It is a country that pretty much has states inside of it, and those states are oblasts. So then you not only have to contend that it's a territory, you also have to contend what those oblasts are. Are those separate territories? Does Ukraine just become a multitude of territories that are its oblasts, or what is it? And then also in the future, it becomes a debate, does it become a state? And then that would be really, honestly, that would be really weird if Ukraine just became a random state we have in Europe that is almost completely geographically isolated in almost every way from the continental United States. Like, at least with Alaska, it's on the same continent, and with Hawaii, it is within relative distance to the United States. Ukraine, however, none of that would really apply. So it would be really weird to just make it a territory. But it is possible, and hypothetically, if it did happen, it probably would be a NATO member. Well, it would be a part of a NATO member. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, we have a whopping $50 super chat from Rob IC Xman. And thank you, Rob, very much for that very generous support.
Holy moly.
And Rob says, hello, LSA friends, the best community around. Give credit and pat on the back, as I don't think you realize how important you are to me, others, and thank you. LSA, LSMC, LSCG, LSAF, and LSN. Much. Never underestimate the good you do, and you guys are the best. And that's very kind of you, Rob. Thank you very much for the kind words.
And I also have to thank you as well, Rob, and I thank you also for the support. And the Lee Spring Army is the best thing there ever is. I mean, it really is. It's the best community out there. I have to give a huge credit to Matthew for helping me, because back in the day, I used to be the one who would axe the bad eggs. Matthew took that over completely, and Matthew's done a great job in making sure to remove any bad eggs whenever they pop up here and make sure that the community is a good one. And also, y'all have had a major shaping part as well into what this community has become. It's been amazing. It truly is an amazing community from start to finish. And I've got to say that they are the greatest community. There's no question about it. Not just because they're on my channel, but because they really are. I've never seen a community as kind, as supportive, and as interesting as the one we have right here. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, Rob. It helps this channel to keep on running, and it helps the LSA to stay alive. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for those kind words, and giving a shout out to the best community on the internet, the Lee Spring Army. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Merdvaya Ruka, who says, "What good juice did I miss?" And take a question from the chat.
Man, you missed a lot of juice. Just nothing but juice. A lot of stuff has happened. Counteroffensive near Bakhmut, possibly a storm shadow being used on Luhansk. Loads of stuff. Loads of stuff. You missed a lot. And we will make sure to get a live...
Juice.
You good?
Juicy juice.
Juicy juice. Juicy fruit. And so with that, I couldn't really understand you because all I heard on my end was nya nya nya. And I went, huh, all right. but with that, we will get a live chat. And thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and the live chat question goes to David Trace, who says, Australia is waiting for the okay from American government to send the 40 F-18s that they haven't sold to give to Ukraine, and what do you think?
I think that's great, and hopefully the United States will approve that so that way those F-18s can arrive, because they can handle some very tough loads on their landing gear due to them having to land on an aircraft carrier. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Thank you so much once again for sponsoring that live chat. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one is from Yuri Bench, who puts in a $5 super chat and says, 2 days ago, Iron Dome blew up 2 missiles in the sky above my head, and all I could think was how difficult life is for the Ukrainians these days.
And that's actually pretty crazy to hear. I actually saw the picture of one of those, I believe it was like a rocket being intercepted over Israel. It was very interesting to see because it was such a good picture. You could actually see the Iron Dome missile colliding with the MLRS rocket, whatever it may be. It was really interesting. And I got to say, it is very difficult for the Ukrainians because that happens for them as a normal fact of life. For Israel, it's kind of an occasional thing. Maybe happens every few weeks, maybe a few months here and there. And when it gets really cold, sometimes not at all. But it happens nonstop in Ukraine. And usually they're not working with just mortar rounds and small rockets. They're dealing with entire $3 million cruise missiles that have 1,000 pounds of explosives in them and are going to blast away an entire city block. And that's got to be really tough and really taxing on the mind of Ukrainians for sure. And also it's good to hear that you got through that A-okay. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Gucci the Pug, who says, "It annoys me how retired American generals join media channels and tote pro-Russian views or Russian apologist views, such as redacted. Why?"
And I thank you so much for the support, Gucci the Pug, and it annoys me a lot. I gotta be honest. I'm gonna be completely honest because I like to be honest with y'all. It really annoys me whenever a general speaks about anything because usually they're always speaking about something that's far out of their depth. Even if it seems like it would be within their wheelhouse, you listen to them talk and you go, "What the hell are they talking about?" Like like with Millie. Oh, the Ukrainians have lost well over 100,000 guys, and then next week he'll just say like 40,000 or 30,000 or something. It's like, where the hell are you getting these numbers? Like, do you even know what you're talking about? Or when he said at the beginning of the war, which Jay Bagwell, who's a longtime viewer of this channel, Old Guard, sent me the actual clip. He told Fox News specifically, it was quoted, he said the Ukrainians would probably only survive 3 days if a war starts with Russia, and then they'll collapse.
3 more days, Papa.
3 more days, Papa. And I honestly, it really wears me down to hear a lot of generals speak. Some of them, however, some of them are okay. Very few of them, and I'm not going to say which. The only one I'll say that I have a dislike for is Millie. But the rest of them, I'm not going to get into who I like and dislike. It's just that usually I dislike a lot of what they say. I don't really know where in the world they even found this crap in reality. And that's something that I see a lot around the world, specifically really in America, on everything, because it seems that people are kind of detached from what reality is. Because they've never really had to live in reality, because America's an amazing place, really, and it's so amazing of a place that it detaches you from a reality, because you don't have to worry about where food comes from or how the governmental systems really work. Everything just kind of works, everything just kind of comes together. So people over here really don't understand a lot of how things actually function, and so they just like live in make-believe world where, like for example, people can just be lizards, like that's just a thing that people think. Like a lot of people, hell, email me and tell me that we are both lizard people, and crazy crap like that. Now I don't know if they're just crazy or if they're just detached from reality and they don't understand that you can't physically be a lizard or anything, but it's interesting to say the least. But with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, Matthew, how many super chats do we have left?
We have about 6.
All right. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Howen, who puts in a $5 super chat. And it says, doing great work, fellas, and long live the LSA, and take one for the chat.
And thank you so much for the support. Long live the LSA, and we will take one from the chat. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And this one goes to Regular Joe, who says, do you think the Cope DeVille T-55 will make a difference on the battlefield?
Hell no. Nah, it's not. It will make a difference on how many Russian soldiers die, which will be an increase, but it won't be making any noticeable difference for the Russians and their situation. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And the next one goes to Sign Fine, who puts in a $5 super chat and says, I need to grab that butt. He's gone. And they said, hello, I've been a viewer of your streams for a while now, and do you have any plans for the future?
Yes, I do. I had plans of going to law school, which starts in the fall. Hopefully our loans get approved. They still haven't been. That should be all, on honesty. Maybe we can hit them up and finally get those approved. But go to law school, then finish law school, and then go on to try and run for a political position, hopefully not sit around and do nothing as a politician, although it seems as though a lot of people have a hard time doing anything. I don't know if it's just that they don't have any ambition or anything, and then eventually become the president in 2040. Some people I've seen say that that's a joke. No, I'm dead serious on that. I really do want to become the president of the United States, and hopefully actually be a good one, instead of what we've kind of been getting over the past 20 years, which honestly I find lackluster. Facts. I mean, like, honestly, at this point, I feel like we aren't even fighting about good policies anymore in the political world on either side. I feel like we're fighting for some of the goofiest things, and they don't even really mean anything for anyone. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. That's kind of like my long-term plans there, and hopefully I'm a president that when, because of course you never respected when you're alive. Hopefully when I die, they put me in history books and they sit there and go, this guy was a guy who actually benefited our country. Kind of like what people say about Teddy Roosevelt, because they look back at him and go, he founded the Food and Drug Administration and the national parks, and he also sent the Great White Fleet around the world and brokered a peace in between Russia and Japan during the Russo-Japanese War. A lot of people have good things to say about him. Hopefully I can go down in history like him. But with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope that answers that fairly well.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Willness, who says, happy birthday, Matt. And thank you very much, Willness. I'm not sure. I think that was sent in after I went on the spill about it being an inside joke, but thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're on to our next one, which goes to Russ Rizzo, who puts in a $5 super chat and says, wait a minute, hold on. I get no respect. Oh, hold on now. I can't say that last part. Never mind.
Oh, man, I'm telling you, I get no respect around here. No respect. I put in a super chat to have them read it. They told me, hey, we can't read. Oh, man, I'm telling you, it's rough around here. Real rough. Oh, man, I'm telling you. But with that, hey, let's get on to the next one, huh?
All right. And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Noob of the Year, who says, perhaps the only way to lasting peace is to do the invaders so hard that any time they even think of Ukraine, a yellow puddle forms at their feet.
And yeah, hopefully so. I would have to agree with that, really. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, big shout out to Eric Kress, who puts in a $3 super chat. And thank you very much, Eric, for the support. No comment left, but we do appreciate it very much. And our next one goes to Dupper Bob, who puts in a $2 super chat and says, Slava Ukraine. And Slava. And thank you very much for the support. And up next, we have a $2 super chat from the Donut King, who puts in a $2 super chat and says, Abrams arrived today, ahead of schedule. And where did you hear that?
I haven't heard that, actually. The Department of Defense came out and said it would be autumn by the time those tanks arrive. And so with that, thank you so much for the support. We'll try and look into that, though. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $2 super chat from Dark Warrior 137, who says, take shots for everything in U.S. military called M1.
We'd be dead. It would be alcohol poisoning at that point. But still, thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Alex Wolf, who says, I just want to say thank you to the LSA for the kind comments. I copied them and showed them, and I copied them to show to my wife, and she will love it. Thank you all very much, and shout out to the 101st.
Hey, shout out to the 101st Airborne, repping it. They for real, you know what I mean? And also, I gotta thank you so much for the support and helping this channel keep on running, and also giving kind words to the LSA as well. The LSA is an amazing group. The best group there is on the internet. I will never back down from that. I remember that one time, someone sat there and said that the LSA was similar to a cult, and if it was the cult, it is the best cult and the kindest cult I have ever seen. It is sadly not a Colt revolver, which you can find at your local firearms store. They are pretty solid revolvers. I'm just kidding. I'm not making a plug for them or anything. We're not sponsored by them. But still, thank you so much once again for the support, and also giving another shout out to the Lee Spring Army. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and up next we have a $2 super chat from Chris Webb, who says something in Ukrainian. Let's see. Let me send you a message real quick and make sure this is okay.
All right. Well, let's put that up for review. I think I know what that one. Yeah, that gets a pass.
Putin Huilo.
I'm Putin Huilo, and thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a $2 super chat from Cat Chaser, who says Ukraine needs to blow the Crimean rail bridge.
And I would agree.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, man, I'm telling you. I get no respect around here. They run a railroad on, they run a train on me every day. What am I? Oh, man, I'm the Crimean Bridge. Oh, man, it's terrible.
But anyways, with that, we're on to the next one. Thank you once again for the support.
And we have a $2 super chat from Ukraine F. Putin, who says 405 days with you guys, and thank you for your reporting.
And thank you so much for being with us for 405 days. That is unbelievable. You've been here since the first month of the war, and thank you so much also for supporting us so that way we can keep this thing running for, if need be, another 400 days. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
And we are into our live chat questions, and we have the Morse code decoders of the stream: Mark Hodges, C. Fay, JP's Gone Fishing, and Cliff Simonson. And they said the Morse code tonight says, Day 5 of Prigozhin crying, and the tears still have not moisturized his head. He still looks like a nutsack.
That's the sound of money. And y'all got that correct. He's been crying for a week over the losses at BAKHMUT, yet he still looks like a nutsack. Moisturized much? And so with that, homeschool much? And thank y'all for deciphering that Morse code message again for the 443rd day. And with that, we are on to the next one. Before we do that, due to time constraints tonight, because we're going well over time at this point, we'll sadly only be able to answer 3 live chats. So with that, we are on to the first one.
And the first one goes to Paul J., who says, apparently Wagner started shooting Russian troops retreating, and can you confirm?
We cannot confirm that. I have not heard of that, actually, and I haven't seen it either. So I can't really say that they're doing that. It's possible, but we've never gotten any proof or really even a mention on this channel of that yet. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the second to last one of the night.
All right. And also that Russian bot came back somehow, but he's banned once again. But up next, we have a question from Underscore, who says, do you think that Lukashenko was poisoned and he may be dying?
Lukashenko, he may just be in bad health. You got to remember, this guy is like pretty old. Lukashenko, let me get you the age. There he is, wearing that stupid Mario hat that they have. Look at that. That's a stupid looking hat, really. I mean, like, you know, anyways, he's 68 years old. You know, these amount of people, they start to get health complications around that age. So it may not be that he's like getting poisoned or anything. It may just be he's old. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was the lucky last person to put in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Guamson, who says, would World War II anti-aircraft guns be useful for anti-drone defense?
They could be, but that requires a decent bit of gunnery training, so that way they know how to lead their target. So it may be effective, but it'll also require a decent amount of training, for at least for the gunnery. Well, I guess the gunners who will be operating those pieces. And so with that, I hope that answers that question fairly well. And we have a final super chat to answer, and then we'll be rounding out tonight's stream.
And this one goes to Wilness, who puts in a €5 super chat and says, do you think that Baltics need some Patriot defense systems?
I would say yes. I believe they already have some, at least by the U.S. forces that are there, or they may even have them on their own for their own militaries. So, but if they don't, I would say yes. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much once again for watching. There are 4,000 people still watching this stream as we round it out 3.5 hours in. And I got to thank every single one of y'all so much once again for watching the stream all the way through. If y'all did enjoy it, please make sure to subscribe. It makes us very happy when people subscribe, because we love to know that people do enjoy this enough that they would like to be notified when this thing keeps running. And we run this 6 days a week. The only day we take off is Monday, and we even make short war summaries on that day as well. So you never miss a day of war coverage on this channel, and we always run these streams at the exact same time at 10 p.m. Eastern time. You can always count on us to be here covering this war news every step of the way with every single one of you all in the Lee Spring Army. And so with that, thank you so much once again, everyone, for watching. I'll see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern time to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. Good night, good luck, stay safe, take care, and of course, Slava Ukraini.
And good night, Slav Ukraine, and that's going to be all. Good night.
Блядь, done.
Yes.
The Lee Spring Army sends its regards.
Ще не вмерла України ні слава, ні воля. Ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля. Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що